Chapter 1. Donghua Continent. Azure Parasol Mountain, Good Abyss Temple. Zhang Yan slowly withdrew from meditation. He felt that his mind was clear, and his breathing was faintly discernible. His entire body also felt light and comfortable. Obviously, his cultivation had improved again. However, there was no joy on his face. Although this breathing technique makes my body lighter and stronger than mortals, it is not the right path after all. Even if I practice until I die of old age, it will only make my body lighter and my eyes sharper. If I continue to wait for the opportunity, not only will it be difficult for me to reach the great Tao, it will also be difficult for me to make a living. Perhaps I will have to take a risk today. Once he took this step, there was no turning back. Zhang Yan began to ponder. Although he had already calculated the gains and losses, it was inevitable that he would be worried when he was about to take this step. He subconsciously held a piece of sparkling and translucent jade in his hand and gently rubbed it. Instantly, a smooth and delicate feeling came from his fingers, and his slightly agitated mood couldn't help but gradually calm down. He could not help but smile. Since he was no longer the original Zhang Yan, he should follow his heart and return to his original self. All the worries of the past could be cast aside. When he thought of this, he suddenly felt comfortable. Obviously, after letting go of his thoughts, he had finally become perfectly compatible with this specific body. 10 days ago, a meteor fell from the sky at the back of Azure Parasol Mountain. The original owner of this body accidentally picked up this piece of jade that fell from the sky. Who knew that he would die on the spot before he could take a look at it? And Zhang Yan, who had struggled in the apocalyptic world for 7 years and accidentally died while covering the retreat of the camp, was able to borrow a body to be reborn into this young man with the same name. Zhang Yan, one of the 3 lower houses of Qinsang School, an in-name disciple of Good Abyss Temple. His predecessor was originally born in a family of officials. At the age of 16, he came to Good Abyss Temple to seek immortality under the guidance of an expert. However, 3 years had passed in a hurry. Other than learning some breathing techniques to strengthen his body, he did not learn any of the legendary immortal techniques. That expert once told him that if he wanted to enter the profound gate, he must first build his primordial spirit, open his immortal meridians, shed his mortal body, and plant his profound root. This was actually referring to the first threshold that cultivators had to face on the path of cultivation, opening meridians. Only by opening up the immortal meridian and washing away the dirt on one's body could one cultivate the legendary immortal arts and immortal arts, and from then on step into the Xianmen Great Tao. As for ordinary breathing techniques, even if one practiced for another 30 to 50 years, they would not be able to enter the immortal sect. At the end of the day, one could not become an immortal without opening their meridians. If he couldn't do this, then he might as well give up on the immortal path. As the saying goes, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and a platform of 9 floors begins with a single step. Opening one's meridians was not something that could be accomplished in one go. First, one had to condense qi into essence building. However, this step made Zhang Yan feel rather helpless. His predecessor had repeatedly practiced the entry-level mantra for 3 years. Every time he went to the guru in the monastery to ask for a more advanced mantra, the guru only told him that the fated chance had not arrived, and that his skill was not deep enough, so he had to practice more diligently. Before his predecessor came up the mountain, he was just a simple and innocent youth. He had no experience in the ways of the world, and had no guidance from others. He thought that it was true, and no matter whether it was summer or winter, he would painstakingly practice, spending 6 hours a day on this mantra. Zhang Yan could only smile bitterly in response. This person was too honest. Did he really believe this kind of excuse? Although he hadn't occupied this body for a long time, he could still see some clues. The so-called fated chance, wasn't it just money and filial piety? Without money and without outstanding talent, who would pay attention to an unremarkable disciple like him? Fortunately, there were gains and losses. What comforted Zhang Yan was that after several years of bitter practice, this body had laid an incomparably solid foundation. In the entire Good Abyss monastery, there was probably no one who paid as much attention to the entry-level mantra as he did. It should be known that this mantra was called Pure Breath Scripture. As the saying goes, Tao begets one, one begets two, two begets three, three begets all things. Pure Breath Scripture was derived from the word one, which could be said to be the beginning of all Tao. As a cultivator's cultivation deepened, there would be differences in the practice of the mantra, but the initial one was the same. Most of the orthodox Xian men in the world use this breathing technique as the most fundamental foundation. But this was after all the most superficial mantra. Without the guidance of the superior mantra, no matter how good the foundation was, it could not germinate and bear fruit. After experiencing the catastrophe of the end of the world in his previous life, in the face of various natural disasters and viruses, Zhang Yan deeply felt the powerlessness and insignificance of mortals. Therefore, at this moment, his desire to pursue Tao was far more intense than anyone else's. Since he had come to this world, he must not miss the Tao of immortality. Although he had great determination and perseverance, there were more pressing matters to consider at the moment. After 3 years of cultivation, his predecessor did not produce, and the money he brought up the mountain had almost been used up. Now, apart from a small cooking tripod, a set of brush, ink, paper, and inkstone, he had no other money. Now, he could only eat wild vegetables to fill his stomach. It was already difficult to make a living, so how could he talk about pursuing the way of immortality? Cultivation was not like escaping deep into the mountains and not eating the food of the world. Instead, it was a matter that consumed a lot of money and food. If one was not from a rich family, they would not be able to support it. Of course, those who were talented and were chosen by the guru were naturally a different matter. But for people like Zhang Yan who took the initiative to go up the mountain to seek Tao, he had to bear all the expenses himself. For the past few days, Zhang Yan had been thinking hard about how to solve the dilemma in front of him. Finally, he thought of a way. If he planned it well, not only could he solve the problem in front of him, but he could also use it to enter the site of the guru of the Good Abyss temple. But this method carried a certain amount of risk. One wrong step would lead to eternal damnation. But since the heavens had given him this opportunity, it was impossible for him to abandon Tao and go down the mountain. He could only move forward, not backward. As the saying goes, the arrow on the bowstring has to be released. In his opinion, the previous Zhang Yan only knew how to cultivate in seclusion and did not know how to excavate his own wealth. Because his predecessor was originally a scholar, he had spent a lot of time and effort on studying the language used by cultivators, the eroded writing. And almost all the ancient books of Taoism were written in this language. It could be said that it was the foundation of cultivation. In Zhang Yan's opinion, the eroded writing was not so much a language, but a cultivator's password was more accurate. Every word of the eroded writing had 1,000 meanings. After forming a sentence, understanding it was like a heavenly book. To understand it, one not only had to rely on talent and comprehension, but also had to use bamboo chips to calculate and deduce, sort out the general idea, and carefully comprehend it. This kind of interpretation relied half on bamboo chips and half on guesswork. Reading it often took a lot of time, and of course, it was not efficient. There were many cultivators who could not understand the meaning of a Taoist book even after reading it for 3 to 5 years. This was a headache for most cultivators. If one did not want to waste time and effort, they could go to the master in the temple to ask for advice. But it depended on whether they had enough luck. Perhaps because of his 2 lives, Zhang Yan, who was quite talented in the eroded writing, felt that his mind was now more agile and quick-witted. Not only did he rarely make mistakes in his divination, but his speed was also several times faster than before. He could rely on helping people interpret the eroded writing in exchange for money. But this alone was not enough. He held the broken jade in his hand and could not help but smile. With it, he would be more confident. He raised his head and looked at the sky. It was already 7 in the morning. The sun was shining brightly outside and the mountain fog had dissipated. He stood up and carried the bamboo basket he had prepared earlier on his back. He held a bamboo banner in his hand and slowly walked out. His residence was a cave built on the cliff by the Good Abyss Temple. It was convenient for those who went up the mountain to meditate and rest. A wooden plank road was built outside the cave. There was no guardrail on the outside, and within 3 steps was a cliff that was tens of thousands of feet high. It was a daunting sight. But he had lived here alone for 3 years, and the scenery in front of him was like a flat road. Naturally, his steps were relaxed. He walked straight out of the plank road and along the mountain path. The Azure Wu Mountain had a total of 18 peaks and 36 streams. At the top of the 9th peak, Yuqiong Peak, there was a smooth boulder called the Thousand-Man Rock. Every time the sun rose in the east and the clouds flew, hundreds of disciples of the Good Abyss Temple would get up early to breathe in the old and take in the new. It took about half an hour to walk from the star-gazing peak where Zhang Yan lived to the Thousand-Man Rock. By the time he arrived, the disciples had already dispersed from their morning classes. Only a few disciples were gathered together in 2s and 3s to discuss their cultivation experiences. He did not pay much attention to them and looked for a pavilion with a wide view. Sitting down on a stone bench, he picked up the bamboo banner, laid out the brush, ink, paper, and inkstone, and sat there with his eyes closed. Not long after, a man walked over the stone steps in front of the pavilion. He looked at the bamboo banner, and then looked at Zhang Yan, and said with wide eyes, "Explain the Eroded Runes Tao book? Brother, you don't seem to have a high cultivation, yet you dare to speak such big words." The man was about 20 years old, with a broad waist and a sturdy body. He wore a blue robe with his sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing his strong muscles. His eyes were spirited and his complexion had a faint jade color. At a glance, one could tell that he had reached the essence-building realm and had already entered the essence-condensation realm. A person with this kind of cultivation should not have a small background. His doubts were obviously not wrong. Generally speaking, the ability to interpret the eroded runes had a lot to do with a person's cultivation. If one had not reached that step, how could one explain the meaning of the book to others? The deeper the pool, the more water it could hold. This was an irrefutable truth. Of course, if some people spent their entire life studying the eroded runes, then they might also have some achievements. For example, those who knew that they had no hope of cultivation, but still had a deep interest in the profound truths. However, these people did not have to worry about food or clothing, and all of them were people who had devoted their entire lives to studying. But Zhang Yan looked less than 20 years old and had not even reached the essence-building realm. It could be said that he had no cultivation, so how could he convince people? Zhang Yan smiled, and his expression was very gentle and polite. He stood up and cupped his hands, saying, "Sir, please give it a try." Seeing Zhang Yan's calm expression, as if he really had a few tricks up his sleeve, the man could not help but feel a little curious. He also cupped his hands and said, "This humble one is Min Lu, a disciple of the Virtue Cultivation Temple. How should I address this junior apprentice brother?" Zhang Yan returned the courtesy and said, "I don't dare, this humble one is Zhang Yan, a disciple of the Good Abyss Temple." The Virtue Cultivation Temple and the Good Abyss Temple were both Qinsang School's 3 lower houses, so the disciples of the 2 factions often came and went to discuss the Tao. However, in the past few days, a major event had occurred in the Azure Parasol Mountain, so many disciples from the 3 factions had gathered here. Most of them lived in the relatively flat Yuqiong Peak. Min Lu laughed and sat down in front of Zhang Yan, saying, "I don't know what junior apprentice brother needs to pay attention to in interpreting the eroded runes. Rice, you can exchange it for silver." Zhang Yan pointed at an inconspicuous line of words at the bottom corner of the banner. The first thing he needed to solve was the problem of his livelihood. This was the most important thing right now. Min Lu looked at it and found that Zhang Yan did not ask for much. If he could really interpret the eroded runes, then it could be considered as a cheap sale. "Alright, I can still afford to pay for rice. Come, I have a Taoist book here." Min Lu was also a straightforward person. He took out a thin Taoist book and slapped it heavily on the stone table. His expression was rather playful as he said, please take a look. Zhang Yan calmly took the Taoist book. After flipping through a few pages, he smiled faintly and dipped his brush in ink. Without thinking, he quickly wrote on the white paper. Min Lu's expression froze as he said in surprise, "Oh, you don't need bamboo chips to deduce?" Usually, when interpreting Taoist books, one would take out bamboo chips for divination and deduction. He had only seen this kind of ability from a few senior apprentice brothers with profound cultivation. No need. Zhang Yan didn't even raise his head. Although his tone was flat, the confidence in it was enough to infect others. Even though Min Lu was still doubtful, his expression unconsciously changed from playful to serious. Zhang Yan flipped through a dozen pages in a row and did not feel that there was anything difficult about it. If it was a high-level Taoist book, then the other party would not have been willing to let him read it so casually. However, after flipping through a few more pages, he frowned and his brush paused. Min Lu glanced at Zhang Yan's expression and couldn't help but smile inwardly. The content at the beginning of the Taoist book was nothing special, but there were a few parts that were quite puzzling. He had to ask a senior apprentice brother to understand it. Even so, there were still some obscure details that he still had questions about. He did not believe that a mere nominal disciple would be able to decipher them. Although he had encountered a difficulty, Zhang Yan did not panic. Instead, he quietly held the jade in his sleeve with his left hand and immersed his mind in it. After a while, he continued to write. From Min Lu's point of view, Zhang Yan just closed his eyes and pondered for a moment before picking up the brush and writing again. He couldn't help but reveal a puzzled expression. He thought that Zhang Yan should have skipped this part, but this was also a common thing in interpreting the inscription erosion. This time, he was just acting on a whim and with a little sense of teasing, so he did not expect any results. About half an hour later, Zhang Yan's brush paused heavily before he finally stopped. He picked up the white paper and blew it dry before handing it to Min Lu. Min Lu took it with a faint smile, glanced at it, and casually praised, "Good writing, good writing." However, after a few more glances, he was shocked. The more he read, the more shocked he became. Finally, he actually stood up and looked at Zhang Yan in a daze. The words used in this interpretation of the Taoist book were very concise and incisive. It could be seen that this Zhang Yan was not only a scholar, but he was also quite accomplished in the field of inscription erosion. Not only that, but he had also clearly written down some of the doubts that Min Lu had originally had. It had to be known that this was all interpreted in less than an hour. The way Min Lu looked at Zhang Yan suddenly changed. He put on an expression of admiration and sincerely said, "Senior apprentice brother's methods are good. This little brother is in awe." Before, he had doubted Zhang Yan because he did not believe that the other had the ability to do so. Now that he saw that Zhang Yan was the real deal, his attitude and tone immediately became much more respectful. Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "I am ashamed to only rely on this to make a living." Min Lu waved the paper in his hand and laughed, "Senior apprentice brother has such skills, why are you worried about making a living? I believe that my fellow apprentices and I will come often in the future to disturb you." To be able to interpret the Taoist book with just a few grains and goods, to him, this was a great bargain. Right now, although Zhang Yan was down and out, he would definitely make a name for himself in the future. If he did not make friends with such a person now, he would not have the chance in the future. Zhang Yan immediately stood up and cupped his hands, saying, "If that is the case, then thank you, senior apprentice brother, for your help." Min Lu was startled and then laughed, "Senior apprentice brother Zhang is a wonderful person." Zhang Yan smiled but did not say anything. Not everyone was as confident in him as Min Lu was. However, since he said that he was willing to find fellow apprentices to take care of his business, whether it was polite or not, Zhang Yan might as well make it clear so that he could not refuse. Moreover, it seemed that Min Lu was not an ordinary Taoist disciple. Over time, he would naturally be able to build a relationship, so why not? Min Lu then bid farewell and left. Before he left, he did not mention anything about the money. Zhang Yan also did not ask, his expression was firm, as if both of them had forgotten about this point. When it was noon, 4 people dressed like servants each pushed a wheelbarrow to the 1000 Zhang Yan pavilion. The person in front bowed respectfully to Zhang Yan, saying, "Are you young Master Zhang?" "We are young Master Min's servants. Following young Master's orders, we delivered these grains and money to young Master's residence." Zhang Yan nodded, saying, "Please wait for a moment." He was not in a hurry to return, and these servants did not have any impatient expressions, quietly waiting at the side. This scene naturally attracted many people to stop and watch. However, on this day, other than Min Lu, no one else came to take care of his business. Only a few people asked a few questions, and no matter who it was, Zhang Yan answered them one by one. It was not until the sun was in the west that he closed the stall and returned to his residence with the 4 servants pushing the wheelbarrow. Not long after Zhang Yan left, a middle-aged scholar in his early 30s rushed over, but found that the pavilion was already empty. He could not help but stomp his feet, his face full of regret. Chapter 2. 300 taels of silver, 500 caddies of rice, 20 caddies of fresh meat, 300 caddies of cured meat and all kinds of vegetables and fruits, 3 sets of a good wide-sleeved Taoist robe, a headband, shoes, and socks, a copper chi cultivating furnace. Zhang Yan looked at the list in his hand. Aside from these things, there were also some scattered daily necessities that were not on the list. He sighed inwardly at Min Lu's generosity. Even if he ate as much as he wanted, it would be enough for him to eat for a whole year. It could be said that it had completely solved his urgent need. In all fairness, if he were to look at the value of the Taoist book today, it would not be worth this much. Even if he were to ask the master in the temple, it would not cost so much. However, considering the fact that Min Lu was deliberately trying to befriend him, Zhang Yan did not act pretentiously and accepted all of it. However, he firmly accepted this favor. After pondering for a while, he wrote a letter and found a Taoist boy who was in charge of chores. He asked him to send the letter down the mountain when he went shopping. After arranging everything, Zhang Yan closed his door and meditated. Although the I Chih clear scripture was only an entry-level mental cultivation method, the path of cultivation was like rowing a boat against the current. If one did not advance, one would fall behind. He knew the importance of the foundation. After transmigrating here for so many days, he did not relax for even a moment. The night passed uneventfully. At dawn the next day, he went to the pavilion at the 1000 Zhang cliff. To his surprise, he found that someone was already waiting there. This person was in his early 30s, but his temples were slightly white. He looked haggard and held a Nanmu book box in his hand. From afar, he saw Zhang Yan walking over with a bamboo banner in his hand. He hurriedly bowed and said, "Are you Zhang Yan, senior brother Zhang?" Zhang Yan stood still and modestly returned the greeting. "Indeed. I am Zhao Yuan from Virtue Cultivation Temple. I heard that senior brother Zhang is good at deciphering eroded scripts, so I came here to ask for advice." Zhao Yuan opened the wooden box in his hand, revealing a thin Taoist book. As if afraid of damaging the Taoist book, he gently took it out and presented it to Zhang Yan. He respectfully said, "If you can resolve the doubts in my heart, I will not mistreat you." Zhang Yan looked at the way Zhao Yuan treated the book as if it were a treasure, and then glanced at the meticulously crafted Nanmu box. He smiled faintly and set aside the bamboo banner in his hand. He took out a white handkerchief from his sleeve and wiped his hands. Only then did he receive the Taoist book. Seeing Zhang Yan's actions, Zhao Yuan couldn't help but have a good impression of him. As soon as the book was in his hands, Zhang Yan flipped through it and found that there was only the first half of the Taoist book. It was obvious that Zhao Yuan didn't want him to read the whole thing. This was also reasonable. He smiled and returned the Taoist book to Zhao Yuan. Zhao Yuan's expression changed and he hurriedly said, "Senior brother Zhang, is there something wrong? Or?" He paused and looked suspiciously at Zhang Yan. Could it be that Min Lu had exaggerated Zhang Yan's ability and that he couldn't actually decipher this Taoist book? Zhang Yan shook his head and smiled, "Senior brother, don't worry. This book is in my heart. The first half of the Taoist book was only a few hundred words. His memory was getting better and better, and he had studied eroded scripts for several years. Naturally, he could remember it after reading it once. Moreover, he wanted to use it to promote his reputation and put on the airs of an expert. Oh. Zhao Yuan was taken aback, but there was still some doubt in his expression. Zhang Yan walked into the pavilion and placed the brush, ink, paper, and inkstone in the bamboo basket on his back on the stone table. After sitting down calmly, he picked up the brush and began to write. He had just seen that this Taoist book named Yongchuan Traversing Water Book was actually just a miscellaneous book of immortal travel. It wasn't difficult for him to decipher this half of the Taoist book. Without waiting for the ink to dry, Zhao Yuan hurriedly grabbed those pages of paper and impatiently read them. At first, he was filled with hope, but not long after, his complexion became worse and worse. After reading it a few times, he dejectedly let out a long sigh and said, "I didn't believe it at first, but I didn't expect it to be true. I spent so much effort in vain." That's right, how can people of my generation casually look at the true scriptures of wonderful techniques? I've been blinded this time. Zhang Yan was surprised. "Senior brother, why do you say that?" Zhao Yuan revealed a bitter expression and said, "Junior brother, you also know that it's difficult for us nominal disciples to cultivate. Even those rich and wealthy families have to give some offerings to those evil slaves from time to time in order to obtain some methods. I won't hide it from junior brother Zhang. A few days ago, senior brother Bian said that if I find a pound of glittering sinks into sand, he will give me a Taoist book. Who knew?" Alas! Zhang Yan suddenly understood. Whether it was the Good Abyss Temple, the Virtue Cultivation Temple, or the Peace Temple, there were only a dozen or so real disciples. They usually concentrated on cultivation, and the daily chores were handled by the stewards around them. Although these people were stewards, they shouldn't be underestimated. They also carried the title of nominal disciples. After reading the Taoist book, the disciples would always leave behind some handwritten copies. These servants secretly copied some and sold them to nominal disciples or some rich families who yearned for cultivation. However, there were also different levels. If it wasn't a real rich family, they wouldn't give you face and would only give you some miscellaneous books. Most of the Taoist books circulated among the three lower houses came in this way. Although Zhao Yuan's family had been doing business for generations and could be considered a well-to-do family, it was still far from those nobles. Zhang Yan's previous targets were precisely these rich slaves. These people had great power, and most of them had colluded with the inner disciples. Ordinary disciples absolutely couldn't afford to provoke them. Even if they tricked them, it would be a waste. This time, Zhao Yuan was eager to seek the Tao. He heard that a certain nominal disciple was searching everywhere for the 5 elements divine sand and was willing to take out a few authentic Taoist books for his senior and junior brothers to study. He steeled his heart and approached this person's steward. Not only did he offer a caddy of water moon gem sinks into sand, he also sent a large amount of money in exchange for an authentic book. Zhao Yuan had originally thought that this Taoist book would definitely be an immortal technique. He didn't expect to find that it was only a travel journal, even worse than ordinary qi cultivation techniques. He couldn't help but feel regret, but he was also afraid that he had made a mistake in deducing the eroded runes. Within a few months, he spent a large amount of money to consult a few of the nominal disciples, but the results were all the same. Just as he was in despair, he heard from Min Lu that Zhang Yan was quite good at deciphering the eroded runes. In his desperation, he took out another half of the Taoist book to consult Zhang Yan. "I've been on the mountain for 6 years, and today my plan has failed. It seems that I have no fate with the Xian men. I might as well go back to my hometown to do business." Zhao Yuan was already 38 years old. Seeing the difficulties of cultivation and the repeated setbacks, he couldn't help but feel discouraged and wanted to leave the mountain. Looking at the other half of the Taoist book, he couldn't help but feel angry. He grabbed the book in his hand and was about to tear it in half. Hearing this, Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He suddenly reached out and grabbed Zhao Yuan's wrist, saying, "Senior brother, wait." Zhao Yuan looked up in surprise. Zhang Yan looked at Zhao Yuan and said in a low voice, "If senior brother trusts me, can you let me have a look at the second half of the book?" Zhao Yuan heard the hidden meaning in Zhang Yan's words. He hesitated for a moment before saying, "What does senior brother mean?" Zhang Yan said sincerely, "Forgive me for being blunt, but the Eroded Runes Taoist book is all about unity, reflecting the front and the back. If I hastily separated it, I wouldn't be able to understand its meaning. Just now that I've read this book, there are some places that are quite mysterious. Perhaps, oh." Zhao Yuan's eyes widened as he looked at Zhang Yan. He seemed to understand the meaning of Zhang Yan's words. His whole body unconsciously trembled. Could it be? Zhang Yan smiled and said, "I'll do my best and leave the rest to heaven." Zhao Yuan clenched his teeth, stood up and stamped his feet, saying, "Fine, I'll read it with senior brother." He had originally given up on this idea, but Zhang Yan's words gave him a glimmer of hope. Although it was still very uncertain, how could he easily let it go? Watching Zhao Yuan hurriedly leave, Zhang Yan got up and paced back and forth, saying slowly, "In ancient times, there was Yong County, also known as Chuanda. The terrain was high, and rivers converged. It was like a crouching tiger, looking south at the Dongzhou, and like a hidden dragon looking down at the beach, wanting to enter the North Sea." The more he read these words, the more he felt that it was likely to be a hidden meaning. Originally, he had only thought of this book as a travel book, but when Zhao Yuan said that it was fate and not fate, he suddenly remembered that the predecessors of Taoism always liked to play with mysteries and add obstacles to one's heart. Perhaps there were some mysteries that he had not discovered. In less than an hour, Zhao Yuan rushed back, panting. He did not say a word, but pulled out a Taoist book from his bosom and stuffed it into Zhang Yan's hands. Zhang Yan nodded and calmly sat down to read. Zhao Yuan nervously looked at his face, worried about his gains and losses. However, Zhang Yan's expression remained calm, not giving the slightest clue. After he finished reading the entire book, Zhang Yan thought in his heart, "Sure enough." This time he was very sure, there were dragons and tigers, it was clearly about the intersection of water and fire, and the 8 rivers referred to the 8 meridians, and the water was the meridians. The entire Tao book's etchings were extremely shallow, even a person with a dull aptitude would be able to understand 1 or 2 of them. Moreover, the essence-building secret art was written in the form of a travelogue, but if one did not study it with sincerity, or if one's Tao heart was always there, then they would really miss it. This immortal master could be said to have far-reaching intentions. But now he was thinking about another issue. Should he tell Zhao Yuan? It was reasonable to say that even if he said that this was a travel book, Zhao Yuan would not be able to do anything about it, and would not attract the attention of others. But thinking about it, this was only an essence-building Taoist book, although it was rare, but compared to the long road of cultivation, it was nothing. Doing such a thing would not bring him any benefits, and would also hinder him from walking on the Tao. He would not do such a thing. Zhang Yan slowly raised his head, cupped his hands, and said with a smile, "Congratulations brother Zhao, the Eternal River Traversing Water book is actually the Eternal River Traversing Meridian method. It is really a rare essence-building Taoist book." Zhao Yuan's eyes widened a little, and his whole body trembled as he said, "Really?" Zhang Yan sighed and said, "If senior brother had read the 2 Taoist books together, perhaps someone would have already seen through it." Zhao Yuan shook his head and said, "Otherwise, senior brother is a gentleman. If it was someone else, they may not tell the truth to this Zhao. Senior brother is really this Zhao's benefactor. Please allow this Zhao to pay his respects." He bent down, and solemnly gave a big bow to Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan hurriedly helped him up, and said, "This senior is using the water to describe his qi, and his words are profound and profound. The entire Taoist book is like a fish scraped off its scales. It is really rare. This junior brother has the heart to try it. I don't know if senior brother Zhao would allow me to practice it or not." Zhao Yuan was startled. This Taoist book had obviously been completely memorized by Zhang Yan's memory. Even if he secretly practiced it, he would still be helpless, but now he was still asking him, it was obvious that he respected him. Zhao Yuan was even more moved, and quickly said, "You are too kind, senior brother's words make this little brother feel ashamed, senior brother's great kindness cannot be repaid, this book can be learned." He felt around his body, feeling that the bag of pearls he had originally prepared couldn't be taken out. After thinking for a moment, he took out a paper bag from his bosom and handed it to Zhang Yan with both hands, saying, "I was in a hurry today, so I didn't bring any treasures. This is the jade gué sand, of the 5 elements divine sand, it is still worth a bit of silver. Please accept it, senior brother, I will repay you in the future." Zhang Yan didn't refuse, calmly accepting it, and then reminded him, "Senior brother's mood has been through ups and downs today, it is not suitable for you to cultivate." Since he had decided to be a good person, he might as well be a good person to the end. Zhao Yuan hurriedly nodded in thanks. He looked at Zhang Yan, hesitated for a moment, and then took a step forward, saying in a small voice, "Senior brother, deciphering the eroding runes is indeed a good thing, but it will incur the jealousy of others." Hearing this, Zhang Yan's expression became serious, and he earnestly said, "Don't worry, senior brother, I have my own plans." Zhao Yuan nodded. Since they were both understanding people, it was fine to stop here. He cupped his hands, saying, "If senior brother needs any help, just say the word. I will do my best to help." He solemnly bowed again, then turned to leave. Zhang Yan looked at the other's back, deep in thought. It seemed that Zhao Yuan was also confiding in him. If he didn't treat him as a good friend, he wouldn't have mentioned it. Deciphering the eroding runes seemed normal, but in reality, it was like stealing food from the mouths of the new disciples. Originally, they would first sell the Taoist books, then sell the deciphered manuscripts, which would allow them to make a profit twice in a row. Now, it was the same as giving Zhang Yan a knife, cutting off their source of income. It was fine for now, but as time passed, it would inevitably cause them to be unhappy, and the consequences would be hard to predict. This was the source of Zhao Yuan's worry. Now that Zhang Yan had enough money and food, he didn't need to rely on deciphering the eroding runes to make a living. However, his plan wasn't that simple. He was a cultivator, so he naturally understood that cultivation was the foundation. Earning money was just a matter of convenience. His real goal was to attract the attention of the upper echelons of the Good Abyss Temple. Zhang Yan had been in the apocalyptic world for 7 years, and he had even entered the core of the survivor camp. He knew very well that there were only 2 essential differences between the upper and lower echelons. One was the control and distribution of resources, and the other was the asymmetry of information. Although these were 2 different worlds, the principles were the same. As a major Taoist sect, the Yutsang sect had more than 300 registered disciples like him in the Good Abyss Temple, as well as more than 1,000 Taoist apprentices who did chores. However, there were only more than 10 true disciples. However, these dozen or so people and the 3 gurus in the temple had all the cultivation books. The new disciples of the Good Abyss Temple usually cultivated at the 6th peak of Azure Wu Mountain, Moon Seizing Peak. It was rare to see them unless one was familiar with them. The gurus in the temple would give lectures every month, but without offerings all year round, it was impossible to obtain Taoist techniques. Zhang Yan wasn't from a wealthy family, so this path was obviously not feasible. However, there was another path he could take. That was to become famous. Once he became famous, he would have the opportunity to make friends with new disciples even if he couldn't gain the appreciation of a guru. Once he entered their circle, the possibility of obtaining a superior technique would be much higher. His ability to decipher the eroding runes was his stepping stone. How could he possibly stop before these people noticed him? As for the danger he might face, he smiled. Normally, he wouldn't take such a risk, but these days, he narrowed his eyes and looked in the direction of Azure Wu Mountain's main peak, God Cometh Peak. This was a great opportunity. Chapter 3. In the evening, Zhang Yan returned to his residence. As soon as he returned to his residence, he lifted the stone strip that sealed the door and locked it. The light in front of him dimmed. In the dark room, Zhang Yan could not hide the joy in his heart. He did not expect that the most important essence-building Dao technique before opening the meridians would be so easy to obtain. Even with his qi cultivation, he could not help but feel a little excited. He was not in a hurry to cultivate. Instead, he washed his hands, changed his clothes and lit the incense burner. After meditating for a moment, he took out a piece of white paper and wrote down the entire technique. As the words appeared, his whole body slowly relaxed and his mood gradually settled down. When he finished writing the entire Yong Chuan Qi circulation technique, his state of mind gradually adjusted to its peak. Essence building was to condense all the internal qi in one's body into the Shin-Kei acupuncture point and combine it with the innate qi from the mother's womb, thus planting the immortal root spirit seed. There was a chant, when the internal qi is mixed, the origin is born. This was the path that must be taken before opening the immortal meridians. In the future, this step was very important. Sitting down on the praying mat, he expelled all the distracting thoughts from his mind. First, he began to circulate his qi. After sitting like this for half an hour, his heart was calm and peaceful. After everything was ready, he began to chant the chant, guiding the internal qi to move according to the meridian circulation technique. But not long after, he stopped. Zhang Yan frowned slightly. In the past, his qi and meridians had always been smooth and unobstructed. However, this time, he felt that something was wrong. Not only was his qi intermittent, but his steps were also rather sluggish. It was as if he was stumbling forward, stumbling and stumbling. Fortunately, he had just started cultivating. He simply dispersed the internal qi that he had guided, calmed his mind, and started from the beginning again. But this time, the situation was the same as the last time. Zhang Yan's face congealed. He opened his eyes and decisively stopped his cultivation. Cultivation was not something that could be forced. If he blindly tried to be brave, it would only damage his own foundation. Could it be that his aptitude was too poor, so he could not cultivate this technique? He shook his head. If it was due to his aptitude that he was unable to cultivate a high-grade technique, that might be the case. But if even his qi and meridians were not smooth, then the problem definitely did not lie there. What was the reason? Could it be because of the technique itself? Zhang Yan looked at the incantation again, puzzled. The incantation didn't have any tricks such as reversing the flow of qi, not going through special channels, or reversing the flow of qi. With a single glance, one could tell that it was the most authentic Xianmen method. How to take each step, where to circulate the qi, how to coordinate the acupoints, and how to respond to the breathing were all explained clearly and in great detail. The only thing missing was the guidance of a teacher. How could there be any problems with such an incantation? If neither of these two reasons were true, then it was possible that he had not found the right cultivation method. Thinking of this, Zhang Yan's heart shook. He picked up the meridian channeling method and looked at it a few times. When he saw the words, flowing water, its power is natural, he faintly realized where the problem was. Perhaps it was because the incantation was explained in great detail that caused him to be too deliberate when he cultivated and forgot the true meaning of flowing water in the Taoist book. One should know that some Xianmen methods focused on the will of the mind, while others focused on the method. Both were indispensable and complemented each other. However, there was a distinction between the main and the secondary. This incantation clearly focused on the will of the mind, followed by the method. When he cultivated, he only focused on the method and neglected the will. The primary and secondary were reversed, and the deliberate carving was too heavy. Naturally, he was at a disadvantage. Zhang Yan put down the incantation and rubbed his sleeves as he muttered to himself. Even though he had found the problem, he still could not continue. As long as he wholeheartedly cultivated this method, the obsession would always exist. This was contrary to the will of the mind. Therefore, he would not be able to forcefully cultivate it. If he were to let it go, of course he could get rid of the obsession, but naturally, he would not be able to increase his cultivation level. This was like a dead knot within a loop. Zhang Yan stood up and paced back and forth in the room with his hands behind his back. He was thinking about how to cultivate. On the path of cultivation, there would always be all kinds of obstacles and obstacles. If one was not careful, one would fall into the wrong path. If it was light, one's cultivation level would regress instead of improving, and one's foundation would be damaged. If it was heavy, one would go mad and their life would be in danger. At this moment, the benefits of having a teacher could be seen. Not only could they give advice, but they could also help and protect during critical moments. Naturally, the danger during cultivation would be greatly reduced. However, Zhang Yan was merely a disciple in name. He had no teacher and no one to guide him. Therefore, he could only rely on himself to slowly explore. Getting rid of the obstacles in his heart was difficult. Zhang Yan knew that this was not the time to be impatient. Instead, he had to be calm. Or else, once he was blinded by the demons, he would only sink deeper and deeper into the quagmire. After thinking for a long time, he realized that there was a way that was feasible. That was to travel far. Sightseeing the famous mountains and scenic spots, observing the artistic conception of the mountains and rivers, forgetting worries and calming one's heart while waiting for the right time. When the right time came, success would naturally follow naturally. This could be said to be the most suitable cultivation method for a Taoist. However, this method was immediately rejected by Zhang Yan. Firstly, it would take too long, and secondly, there were too many variables. This was only before he could open his meridians. If he could obtain a similar profound method in the future, would he have to go sightseeing every time? This would be too much of a waste of time. What's more, the reason why he chose to go into seclusion immediately was because he felt that tonight was the best time for him to break through to the essence-building realm. If he missed this opportunity, he did not know when the next time would come. He could not help but close his eyes and ponder. Since he was able to see the cultivation method in the book, then he could already be considered as a destined person. There was no reason for the senior to leave such an obvious flaw. There must be a way, and it was definitely hidden in the book. He stared at the dense text on the paper back and forth several times, until his eyes were sore. Suddenly, his back stiffened, and his mind suddenly lit up. That's right. How could he forget that this Taoist book was originally written with an etched text? The etched text seemed simple, but it was actually very complex. The meaning behind it was vast, and each word reflected the truth of the world. In just a few strokes, it could explain the life and death of all living things in the world. This Taoist book, after his interpretation, had turned into thousands of words, but if he used the etched text to write it down, it would only be a trifling 600 words. These 600 words had already explained the cultivation method clearly and thoroughly. The etched text used by the senior who wrote the book was already the most superficial and straightforward, but he was instead referring to the transcription of the book. Wouldn't that be the same as looking at the moon through a mirror, giving up what was close at hand to seek what was far away? So, Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He simply dipped the brush into the ink, took out a piece of white paper, and wrote down the entire, Eternal River Meridian Channel method, from memory using the etched text. He had just finished writing down the entire Meridian Channel method, when the originally stiff aura in his body unexpectedly moved inexplicably. Zhang Yan couldn't help but feel refreshed, knowing that he had found the right method. He did not stop writing, and finished the entire cultivation method in one breath. After he finished writing, he did not stop. He then took out another piece of white paper, picked up the brush, and wrote again. Gradually, the thick inner qi in his body, which was originally like stagnant water, seemed to be stirred up by a hidden dragon. It spread to the hundreds of meridians in his body, flowing and flowing. After completing a circulatory cycle, it gathered in his dantian, and so on, endlessly. The whole process was natural, completely automatic with genuine qi, and Zhang Yan did not deliberately pursue it. His mind was completely immersed in the etched text under the brush. At first, the aura in his body was like a trickle, continuous and dense. As he wrote down the meridian channel method again and again, the aura grew stronger and stronger. In the end, it was like a surging river, with waves rising from the long river, surging up and down his body. However, Zhang Yan's heart was neither happy nor sad, and he did not care about it at all. By the end, there was no ink left in the brush in his hand, but in his eyes, the etched text was still gushing out from the brush. Even without the guidance of his thoughts, the inner qi continued to circulate in the qi meridians according to the incantation, breaking through the clogged meridians one by one. After 365 circulatory cycles, the inner qi in his body rose and fell like the tide, like a wave pressing against the various aperture acupoints. When this vast aura reached its peak, the aperture acupoint, which was originally located in the depths of the navel and had been tightly closed since birth, suddenly shook and opened a small gap. The surging inner qi seemed to have found a way to vent, and rushed in. After a moment, it disappeared completely. For a moment, the body became empty, and his whole body felt like it was floating in the void. Without the guidance of a wise master, once a cultivator encountered such a situation, they would inevitably panic and doubt, and their minds would be disturbed, which would lead to failure at the last step. However, Zhang Yan had experienced the cycle of life and death, and his mind was firm. He was still calm, and there was no disturbance in the depths of his heart. He did not care about what was happening in his body, and let nature take its course. Sure enough, not long after, the disappeared inner qi was slowly spat out by the dantian acupoint, but it seemed to be mixed with a trace of innate vitality, which was then absorbed by the dantian acupoint again. After 8 breaths, the inner qi had become one with the innate vitality. When the inner qi slowly returned to the dantian acupoint for the 9th time, the Shin-Kei acupoint in the navel suddenly jumped. Boom! The back of Zhang Yan's head seemed to be lightly knocked by a jade mallet, and a clear and melodious sound entered his ears. In front of him, there was a vast expanse of whiteness, and then there was a burst of light. The saliva in his mouth automatically flowed into his throat, and along with a stream of hot air, it finally fell into the depths of the navel, and finally stopped moving. Zhang Yan's pen suddenly stopped, and when he looked up, he discovered that the ground was covered with his writing paper. In front of him, there was a hole in the cave wall, and a white light penetrated through it. Unknowingly, a night had already passed. At this moment, not only did he not feel tired, but he also felt refreshed, his 5 senses were clear, and his heart was calm. His whole temperament had also changed, and there was a faint aura of otherworldly aura. If he could see himself, he would find that on his face, there was a layer of sparkling and translucent jade-like luster, flowing incessantly on his head, and his eyes were as bright as the stars. This showed that, from today onwards, he had already stepped into the realm of essence-building realm, and was only a step away from the final step of essence-building realm, essence-building realm. Zhang Yan put down the writing brush in his hand, and took a few quick steps forward. He removed the stone strip that sealed the door, opened the door, and stepped out. After taking 2 steps, he stopped, and looked at his hands in amazement. This stone strip that sealed the door weighed more than 300 jin, although his body was strong and healthy, but usually it was quite strenuous for him to move it. But just now, with just a light lift, he was able to move the stone strip to the side. He could not help but suddenly understand. Before, he had often heard people say, that after a cultivator reaches the essence-building realm, their arms have the strength of 1,000 jin, their eyes can see through the fog, their ears can distinguish the sounds of insects and birds, and they are almost like immortals. It seems like this legend is true. Zhang Yan clenched his hands into fists, took a deep breath, and secretly reminded himself, this was only the first step on the road to the Great Way, he must not get carried away, there were many more dangerous passes waiting for him. It was too early to rejoice. At this time, a clear and melodious cry of a crane was heard, lingering in his ears for a long time. Zhang Yan turned his head to look. At this moment the sun had just risen, the clouds were dispersing, the forest on the mountain was dyed with a golden glow, the winding river at the bottom of the cliff was like a white jade belt, from time to time there were 2 or 3 white feathered cranes flying on the plank road. He stood at the edge of the cliff, the cold morning breeze brushing past him, although he was only wearing a robe, but he did not feel the slightest bit of cold, letting his sleeves flutter in the wind. After painstakingly practicing the Heart Sutra for 3 years, once he got his hands on a superior cultivation method, in just one night he was able to condense his chi into essence building. It could be said that he had accumulated a lot of experience. When the conditions were right, success came naturally. He could not help but think, if at this time he still bitterly practiced in the cave every day, only waiting for the heavenly way to give him alms, blindly focusing on opportunities, then would he still have today's good fortune? The answer was obviously no. The road of cultivation was like a magnificent army crossing a single log bridge. There was no way to retreat, only forward. No matter how many difficulties and obstacles he faced, he had to regard it as a smooth road. In his previous life, the Book of Changes once said, "The day is dry and dry, the way is repeated." Didn't it mean that a gentleman must constantly strive to improve himself, regardless of good or bad situation? He must persevere again and again. This was in line with the righteous Yang way. It could be seen that his determination to forge ahead, to temper himself, was in line with the heavenly way. In a word, people must help themselves, and the heavens will help them. Thinking of this, he seemed to have understood something. At this time, his expression changed, and he suddenly turned his head to look at the other end of the plank road. Now that his 5 senses were sharp, he could hear from afar that someone was hurrying towards him. Not long after, the figure of a girl about 17 or 18 years old came into view. Her hair was tied up in a Taoist bun, and she wore a narrow-sleeved long robe, the attire of a man, with a sword hanging on her waist. At first glance, she looked full of heroic spirit, but her chin was slightly pointy, giving people a feeling that she was not approachable. She walked all the way to the front of Zhang Yan, and looked at him with a gaze full of hostility. She asked, "You are Zhang Yan?" Zhang Yan had never seen this girl in his life. He answered, "Yes, I am." "Who are you, miss?" "My name is Zhao Ying." The girl's face was cold. She waved her hand and said, "Quickly pack up and follow me down the mountain. There will be changes if you delay." Zhang Yan only felt that it was inexplicable. He asked in doubt, "Miss Zhao, what do you mean? You little..." Hearing these words, Zhao Ying's anger rose in her heart. She originally wanted to curse out loud, but looking at Zhang Yan's dignified appearance, his temperament and spirit even more outstanding, she couldn't utter the word thief. She could only fiercely stare at him and said, "You still have the face to ask? It was you who caused trouble for my brother." She secretly cursed in her heart that this guy was born with a good appearance. No wonder he could deceive my brother. Zhang Yan was startled when he heard this. He looked at the woman's appearance and vaguely noticed that she looked somewhat similar to Zhao Yuan. He thought for a moment and immediately came to a sudden realization. He asked, "Is there something wrong with senior brother Zhao?" Zhao Ying coldly snorted, her face full of resentment. Zhang Yan understood, and secretly sighed. He had long seen that Zhao Yuan was a person who showed his emotions on his face, and his mind was unstable, so he warned him to be careful in his cultivation, but he didn't expect that there would still be a problem. It turned out that Zhao Yuan had listened to Zhang Yan's words last night, but how could he bear it just because he had the book in his hand? After repeatedly studying it, he unknowingly started to cultivate, but who knew that this method was related to an acupoint, and he used it too hastily, resulting in an accident, and fainting after vomiting a few mouthfuls of blood. Because a major event had happened on Mount Azure Parasol these past few days, his younger sister Zhao Ying, who was originally cultivating in Tai'an Monastery, happened to be on the mountain, and she was furious when she heard the news. She thought that Zhang Yan was only a swindler, so she went to question Min Lu about why he harmed her brother. Originally, Min Lu had only talked about Zhang Yan's matter with a few of his close friends, so many people didn't know about it. Now, in order to protect his reputation, he had no choice but to stand up for Zhang Yan. This result caused another chain reaction. Disciples from the 3 monasteries were now gathered on Mount Azure Parasol, and Hu Xingyu, a disciple from Virtue Cultivation Temple, was also among them. Bian Qiao, who sold the Yongchuan Flowing Water script, was this person's manager. When Bian Qiao heard about this, his first reaction was that someone was trying to swindle him, but he didn't care. Later, when Min Lu showed up, he felt that the matter was not as simple as it seemed. Min Lu had long been favored by the guru, and sooner or later, he would become a disciple of Virtue Cultivation Temple, so he would never speak without thinking. Someone was secretly deciphering the runes? Bian Qiao was shocked and angry. The servants of the 3 monasteries often came and went. Although they didn't say it out loud, no one had crossed the line. In his opinion, Zhang Yan's act of helping Min Lu, Zhao Yuan, and the others to decipher the runes was equivalent to cutting off his source of income. However, Zhang Yan was a disciple of the Good Abyss Temple, so it wasn't appropriate for him to directly make a move against him. Later on, he thought that Zhao Yuan's matter would give him an excuse, so he pretended to visit Zhao Yuan and said that he would definitely seek justice for the Virtuous Cultivation Temple. Not long after, Zhao Yuan woke up. When he found out about this matter, he was shocked. He called Zhao Ying over and gave her a good scolding. He told her to come over and apologize to Zhang Yan immediately. He also told her to arrange for Zhang Yan to go down the mountain to avoid the limelight. How could Zhao Ying be willing to apologize? She still believed that Zhang Yan was a swindler, but she didn't dare go against Zhao Yuan's words. She only wanted to chase Zhang Yan down the mountain and be done with it. Zhao Ying reluctantly said a few more words to Zhang Yan. Although her words were vague, Zhang Yan had a general idea of what had happened. As soon as this incident happened, it seemed that he had already attracted the attention of some people in advance. This happened faster than expected. Zhao Yuan could send someone to inform him in the middle of the night, and did not avoid danger. This showed that this person was worthy of a deep friendship. Zhang Yan's expression was calm. Go back and tell Brother Zhao that I know about this matter. Thank you for informing me in time, but tell him not to worry. I have my own arrangements. From the bottom of her heart, Zhao Ying was not willing to work for Zhang Yan. Now that she saw that he was not willing to go down the mountain, she was even happier. At least she did not go against her brother's instructions. She thought to herself, reckless little thief. You don't know how powerful Bian Qiao is. When that evil slave arrives, there will be a good show for you. Chapter 4. A group of 5 people gathered in the pavilion in front of Qianzhang Cliff. Bian Qiao sat alone on the stone bench in the middle. He was in his early 40s, dressed luxuriously, with a 9-sun scarf on his head and a pair of thick-soled high shoes on his feet. His face was white and chubby, and he was slowly sipping from a purple clay teapot. He looked more like a gentleman than a steward. There were many eyes in front of Qianzhang Cliff. Some people were pointing at him from afar, but he did not care. The servants around him were all dressed in short robes, their chests and abdomens were open, and their faces were full of arrogance. Zhao Ying stood in the distance and secretly scolded Zhang Yan for not knowing what was good for him. She also felt a little regretful. Bian Qiao had always been ruthless, and it was easy for him to deal with a small nominal disciple. If this little thief was beaten to death here, it would be fine, but her eldest brother would definitely scold her. What if she got sick from anger? She had been raised by Zhao Yuan since she was a child. If it were not for her, Zhao Yuan would have already gone up the mountain to seek the way, and he would not have been delayed for 10 years. So she usually did not dare to disobey Zhao Yuan's words. This time, seeing Zhao Yuan vomit blood, she was anxious and resentful, so she was willful this time. But Zhao Ying did not know that although Bian Qiao looked tyrannical, he actually knew when to advance and when to retreat. On the one hand, he tried not to offend people he should not offend. Even if there were some conflicts, others would not argue with him for Hu Xingyu's sake. On the other hand, he unscrupulously bullied and suppressed disciples with no background. It was precisely because of this that he was the most famous and fierce among the many stewards. Steward Bian, Zhang Yan is here. A Taoist boy from Good Abyss Monastery who had been caught to listen to Bian Qiao shrunk his head and looked around. He pointed to a tall figure in the distance and whispered. Bian Qiao was already a little impatient, but when he heard this, he became a little more spirited. He raised his head and casually glanced at the figure. As he looked, the teapot that was raised to his mouth froze, and he said with some surprise, "Is that Zhang Yan?" He had thought that Zhang Yan was just a poor scholar who didn't know the rules. Who knew that the other's appearance was far beyond his expectations? Today, Zhang Yan had changed into the wide-sleeved Taoist robe given to him by Min Lu. Not only was he handsome, but he was also well-proportioned and tall, a head taller than the average person. His eyes were awe-inspiring, and as he strode over, he looked valiant and heroic, with an intimidating aura. But what made Bian Qiao even more surprised, was that Zhang Yan's face was covered with a layer of obscure luster. He had been handling chores by Hu Xingyu's side all year round, so naturally he had a lot of experience. With just a glance he knew that Zhang Yan had not only reached the realm of congealing essence and visualizing meaning, but he also had a faint sign of stepping into the true essence realm. Bian Qiao grinned and was secretly annoyed. He didn't know what the person who inquired about the news was doing. With such cultivation, how could he be an ordinary nominal disciple? In fact, Zhang Yan's predecessor had a dull personality. In the 3 years he had been on the mountain, he only knew how to immerse himself in bitter cultivation, studying the erosion runes behind closed doors. He had never made any friends with anyone. It could be said that he was unremarkable, so in such a short time frame, it was only natural that he would not be able to find out anything. According to Bian Qiao's original plan, if this Zhang Yan did not have any background, then he would naturally teach him a lesson, cripple him, and throw him down the mountain. In his eyes, a nominal disciple was nothing. If it were not for the fact that this was the Good Abyss Temple, then with just a word from him, someone would rush to do it, and he would not even need to personally come forward. However, he did not expect that at first glance, he would feel that Zhang Yan was not simple. Coupled with the fact that Zhang Yan was proficient in the erosion runes, generally speaking, such a person either had a disciple backing them, or had a prominent family background. Thinking of this, Zhang Yan's figure in his eyes suddenly became profound, and he did not dare to act rashly. However, in the past, he had relied on Hu Xingyu's name to think of himself as a character. Since the scene had already been laid out, he could not shrink back in front of so many disciples and lose his momentum. He forced a smile on his face as he sat there and cupped his hands towards the approaching Zhang Yan, saying, "My name is Bian Qiao, and I usually take care of worldly affairs for virtuous cultivation temples Hu Xingyu. Is this junior brother Zhang Yan?" Zhang Yan stopped and glanced at Bian Qiao with a calm and tranquil gaze. Yes. Bian Qiao had been carefully observing Zhang Yan's expression. Seeing that his eyes were calm and unmoved when he heard Hu Xingyu's name, Bian Qiao was even more certain of his previous judgment. Pretending to be friendly, he probed, "May I know how to address senior brother Zhang and the senior brothers of the Good Abyss Temple?" The senior brothers that Bian Qiao mentioned were naturally the disciples of the Good Abyss Temple. How could Zhang Yan not know what he was thinking? With a smile that was not a smile, he said, "Naturally not as close as brother Bian and senior brother Hu." Bian Qiao's expression changed. These words were faintly mocking him for being a servant. What he hated most in his life was people mentioning his background. He couldn't help but feel annoyed, and the smile on his face became somewhat stiff. He looked refined, but he was used to being arrogant, so his tone immediately became unfriendly. He coldly swept a glance over Zhang Yan, saying, "Let me ask you. I heard that you interpreted the erosions for my virtuous cultivation temple's disciples? Is there such a thing?" Zhang Yan was extremely calm, saying, "Yes." Bian Qiao sneered, "I also know that you've been on the mountain for 3 years. How could you not know that the disciples of the 3 temples have their own rules? Fine, I won't make things difficult for you today. Swear here that you will no longer interpret the Tao books for the disciples of the 3 temples, and I will let you go on behalf of my senior brothers. I will let bygones be bygones. What do you think?" Zhang Yan smiled, saying, "Since Steward Bian has spoken, then from now on, I will not interpret the Tao books for the disciples of the Virtuous Cultivation Temple." Bian Qiao narrowed his eyes at Zhang Yan, saying coldly, "Junior brother, do you really not understand, or are you just making fun of me? I'm talking about the disciples of the 3 temples. Do you understand?" Although the lower house was divided into 3 temples, they usually interacted frequently. If someone obtained a Tao book from the Virtuous Cultivation Temple and then asked a disciple from the other two temples to interpret the erosions for Zhang Yan, would he be able to stop them? Wouldn't that be the same as not saying anything? Zhang Yan cupped his hands and lightly said, "Since that's the case, forgive me for not being able to comply." How could he not know the crux of this matter? He had deliberately said this to advance by retreating. In this way, it wasn't that he didn't want to agree, but that Bian Xiao had gone too far. Bian Xiao was originally afraid that Zhang Yan had someone backing him, so he thought that if they both took a step back, they wouldn't fall out. He didn't expect that Zhang Yan didn't know what was good for him and didn't give him any face. On second thought, although Zhang Yan seemed to have some background, he had broken the rules first and was in the right when it came to his senior brothers. What was there to be afraid of? Since you won't listen to my kind words, don't blame me for not giving you face. Do you really think I have no way to deal with you? Before coming here, he had already made preparations. Since there was no way to reconcile, he was prepared to use his methods. Bian Xiao suddenly laughed and said, it's fine, it's fine. Since junior brother has some experience in the Tao of erosions, why don't you let us broaden our horizons? I have 3 Tao books here. Please advise me, junior brother. With a wave of his hand, a manservant behind him immediately brought out a Tao book. Bian Xiao tapped the book with his knuckles and said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, I also know junior brother Zhang's rules. Rice and money won't be lacking, so please advise me, junior brother Zhang. With business knocking on his door, Zhang Yan naturally wouldn't refuse. He took 2 steps forward and reached out to take the Tao book. Wait. Bian Xiao put his hand on the Tao book and stared at Zhang Yan, saying, I am sincerely asking for advice. If junior brother Zhang interprets it wrongly or can't decipher it, what will you say? Zhang Yan said with an indifferent expression, senior brother can smash my signboard. From now on, I won't speak of erosions again. Bian Xiao snorted and shook his head, saying, not enough, not enough. Zhang Yan also smiled and withdrew his hand. He stood up straight and said, then what does senior brother think? Bian Xiao narrowed his eyes and said, you will disperse your cultivation and leave the mountain. From now on, you are not allowed to take half a step into the territory of my Qinsang school. Because there were many people gathered here, some of the disciples of the 3 lower houses gradually surrounded them and exclaimed when they heard this. This was completely cutting off Zhang Yan's path of cultivation. Zhang Yan was surprised. He didn't think that Bian Xiao would become much tougher after not acting up before. He didn't know that this was Bian Xiao's nature as a slave, chasing small profits and being afraid of adults. It was just that he couldn't see through Zhang Yan's background, so he didn't directly make a move. If Zhang Yan lost this time and no one stood up for him, then naturally he would be ruthless and leave no way out. If someone came forward to plead for leniency, and if they had a powerful background, he could also give them face and ask for a favor. In short, as long as Zhang Yan made a mistake in his interpretation of the book, whether it was flat or round, he would be at his mercy. What senior apprentice brother said is also true, but... Zhang Yan looked at him calmly and said, if so, then this price is not something that can be offset by mere grains. Bian Xiao laughed, fumbled in his sleeves for a while, and then took out a white jade porcelain bottle and placed it on the stone table. Junior apprentice brother seems to have already reached the essence building realm. This is the harmony pill. There are a total of 23 pills in this bottle, each pill is worth 1,000 gold. What does junior apprentice brother think about it? The surrounding disciples of the 3 lower houses suddenly began to talk, looking at this bottle of pills. Their eyes were filled with a fiery passion, but they also knew that this was not something that they could obtain. But in their hearts they were cursing. This Bian Xiao was obviously just a steward, and did not have any cultivation, but still had such a good pill. It was simply a waste of a treasure. Zhang Yan was familiar with the ancient books and miscellany, so of course he knew the value of this pill. Not only could it help in nourishing one's body, it could also wash away the impurities in one's body, but it could also strengthen one's foundation, improve one's blood circulation and open up one's meridians. It was very beneficial to cultivators who often sat for several days and nights without moving. The key was that there was no market price for it. This was a pill that only the disciples could enjoy. There was no need to think about it anymore. He immediately replied, yes. Zhaoying, who was in the crowd, saw that Zhang Yan had agreed, and could not help but curl his lips. This little thief really did not care about his life. Did he not see that Bian Xiao had set a trap for him? Bian Xiao cupped his hands towards the crowd and said, good, today there are many senior apprentice brothers here, so that they can be witnesses, lest they spread out that I, Bian Xiao, am a bully. His means were also very ruthless, as he took the initiative to block Zhang Yan's escape route with his words. Zhang Yan looked coldly at Bian Xiao's petty actions, but he did not care at all. He sat down on the stone bench as if there was no one else around, and picked up the book to read. When the surrounding disciples heard Bian Xiao's words, they gathered their courage, wanting to see what this Zhang Yan was capable of, that he actually dared to go against Bian Xiao. The disciples of Tai Peace Temple and Good Abyss Temple were fine, but in the eyes of the disciples of Virtue Cultivation Temple, Bian Xiao could be said to be a tyrant on the mountain all these years, and no one dared to stop him. Today, there was actually someone who dared to go against Bian Xiao, so they could not help but feel excited, and even ordered their Taoist children to find their close friends, so that they would not miss this good show. Chapter 5. After reading the Taoist book for a while, Zhang Yan shook his head and put it down. Bian Xiao sneered and said in a strange tone, what is it? Does junior apprentice brother have any difficulties? Zhang Yan sighed and said, it's just a scraped-up breathing technique. It should be the work of a senior who wrote it for fun. Those who don't know the truth are easily fooled. If Steward Bian wants to cultivate, I think that the pure Qi scripture is more suitable for you to get started. Bian Xiao was startled and his face darkened. This Taoist book was, as Zhang Yan had said, faked using the eroded runes. In fact, it was very unorthodox. Those who did not study the eroded runes for a long time would not be able to easily see through it. When he got it, he wanted to sell it for a good price. Today, he just happened to use it to deal with Zhang Yan. He thought that even if Zhang Yan could decipher it, if he did not see through it, he could still use it to ridicule Zhang Yan and humiliate him. He did not expect that Zhang Yan would seize the opportunity to ridicule him. He could not explain himself and could not help but feel depressed. At this time, someone in the crowd exclaimed, this Zhang Yan did not use bamboo chips to decipher the eroded runes. As soon as this was said, many people around also noticed this detail and were puzzled. Yes, why did they not see Zhang Yan using bamboo chips? They could not be blamed for their lack of knowledge. After all, there were very few people who could afford to pay a master. Even if they could get their hands on a Taoist book, it would be a copy that had already been deciphered. No one had ever seen someone who did not need bamboo chips to decipher the eroded runes. The few people who understood the reason looked at Zhang Yan with surprise and admiration. Zhang Yan was calm and relaxed. He smiled and said, Steward Bian, do you need me to write another copy? No need. Bian Xiao snorted, and with a sweep of his hand, the Taoist book on the table fell to the ground. With a gloomy face, he took out another Taoist book. First, he slowly raised it up, and then he loosened his hand, letting it fall on the stone table. The corner of his mouth curled up, and with a fake smile, he said, I'll have to trouble Shitty to take a look. Bian Xiao sneered inwardly. It had to be known that there were complex and simple etchings as well. When Hu Xingyu first read this Taoist book, he had also had to carefully decipher it. Even if Zhang Yan was more proficient in the Tao of etchings, could he compare to Hu Xingyu? Taking a step back, he had Hu Xingyu's original interpretation in his hand. Even if Zhang Yan could interpret it, it would definitely be full of mistakes. With a comparison, he would be exposed. Just now, he could see that Zhang Yan's words were sharp. Once he let him hit his sore spot, he would not be able to do anything to him. All he had to do was wait for Zhang Yan to make a mistake, and then he would immediately attack. He would not give Zhang Yan any time to speak, and he would make sure that it was true. Seeing Bian Xiao's expression, Zhang Yan knew that this Taoist book was not simple. However, he did not cower in fear. Instead, his interest was piqued. After reading it carefully, he found that it was indeed a little difficult, but he could handle it with his ability. He actually felt a little disappointed. Just now, he found that as his cultivation increased, his mind became clearer when deciphering the etchings. It was like a clear spring, untainted by a speck of dust. Even his speed was faster than usual. It seemed that he did not need to use that trump card for the time being. After flipping through a few more pages, he found that this was a good Taoist technique. Suddenly, an idea popped into his mind. He originally wanted to make a name for himself. Wasn't this a rare opportunity? Having made up his mind, he sped through the pages. When he was done, he closed the Taoist book and sat down with his eyes closed. Seeing his actions, everyone was stunned. Did this Taoist book stumble Zhang Yan? Bian Xiao's eyelids twitched. His eyes were much sharper than everyone else's, and he had a bad feeling about this. After a while, Zhang Yan opened his eyes and said, "This book is called Aperture Cleansing Diagram, and the technique is Aperture Opening Divine Pass, Cleansing Spirit Pill." Surprisingly, Zhang Yan didn't need to read the book at all. He only read it once and began to decipher it word by word. The crowd gasped in surprise. Obviously, Zhang Yan's actions had shocked them. Not long after, Zhang Yan's clear voice rang out, and the whispering crowd quieted down. Their attention was gradually drawn to the contents of the Taoist book. Bian Xiao was dumbfounded. He trembled as he took out a copy of the book from his sleeve and compared it to what Zhang Yan was reciting. Cold sweat appeared on his forehead, and the more he read, the more sweat appeared on his forehead. Although the language used in the copy was slightly different from Zhang Yan's, that was only a difference in language habits and knowledge. The meaning was more or less the same. Moreover, because Zhang Yan had deliberately spoken in a simple manner, his words were more fluent and easy to understand. If it weren't for the fact that this Taoist book was recently read by Hu Xingyu, Bian Xiao would have thought that Zhang Yan had already read it once. For a moment, only Zhang Yan's voice was left on the 1,000-feet cliff. It wasn't very loud, but it had a deep aura. This Taoist book was called Aperture Cleansing Diagram. It focused on how to temper one's acupoints and meridians according to the time. Most of the people present had never heard of such a superior method. Now that they heard it, they knew that it was rare to find a true method. Everyone held their breath and listened with rapt attention. Bian Xiao's face was pale. He didn't think that this Zhang Yan would be so powerful. Once this technique was leaked, he wouldn't be able to bear the blame from Hu Xingyu. Looking at Zhang Yan's posture, it seemed that he wanted to read the entire Taoist book from beginning to end, word for word. For a moment, he didn't have the time to feel sorry for himself. He picked up the purple clay teapot and threw it to the ground. With a loud bang, Zhang Yan's voice also stopped. He raised his head to look at the trembling Bian Xiao, and a faint smile appeared on his face. Everyone finally came back to their senses. They all had a look of regret. When they looked at Zhang Yan, their faces were full of admiration. When they looked at Bian Xiao, their gazes were full of resentment. At this time, a series of putong sounds were heard. The people in the front row all fell to the ground. It turned out that when they were listening to Zhang Yan's interpretation of the Taoist book, everyone's body unconsciously leaned forward. Their chests were pressed against each other's back. The people standing in the front were now relaxed and naturally couldn't stand still. Among them, there were some impatient people who sat down on the spot and meditated. The crowd didn't disturb them and consciously made a circle. Zhaoying was originally also listening attentively. According to the Taoist book, his inner qi was constantly cleansing his body. He only felt that he was immersed in a mysterious realm. His whole body was warm and he couldn't extricate himself. Now that he had woken up, he secretly thought that this little thief seemed to be really capable. But why did Big Brother vomit blood? Was it really as Big Brother said? She was too impatient. Did she really blame a good person? For a moment, she looked at Zhang Yan with a complicated expression. Bian Xiao took out a silk handkerchief and wiped the sweat on his temples. He was relieved. He originally thought that this Taoist book was enough to stump Zhang Yan. He didn't expect that Zhang Yan would be so powerful. When he came here, he had prepared a total of 3 Taoist books. Each one was more profound than the one before. But he had never thought of taking out the last one. It was actually just a Taoist formula. Hu Xinyu had another use for it. If he took it out now, if Hu Xinyu investigated. But in front of hundreds of people, he was forced into a corner by Zhang Yan. If he retreated now, it could be said that he had lost all his face. He was afraid that in the future, those guys would step on his face. Now that the arrow was on the bow, there was no choice but to release it. His face twitched. He clenched his teeth and took out a thin piece of yellow paper. This incantation only has 16 eroded characters. Since the first 2 Taoist books weren't difficult for junior brother Zhang, this one should be easy for you. This Taoist formula, Song of Song, although it only had 16 characters, it contains 64 kinds of Taoist songs. When decoding it, as long as one was missing, it would not be considered a success. More importantly, this Taoist formula was time-consuming to deduce. It was not something that could be deduced in a day. Bian Xiao stared at Zhang Yan. He didn't believe that he could pass this time. Picking up the thin paper, Zhang Yan furrowed his brows imperceptibly. He could see that even though there were only a few words in this Taoist incantation, it was difficult and abstruse, and the etchings used were also unusual. There were many variations hidden in it, and it was not as simple as what Bian Xiao had said. He waved the thin paper in his hand and said in a low voice, "Steward Bian, this Taoist formula seems simple but is actually difficult. It takes a lot of time to deduce, so you may have to wait for a long time." Bian Xiao had absolute confidence in this Taoist formula. He looked at the sky. It was already midnight. He thought to himself, so what if Zhang Yan can deduce until tomorrow? Won't the result be the same? So he waved his hand and said, "No problem. Let's set the time limit tonight. I believe that junior brother Zhang won't be able to decipher a mere 16 eroded characters, right?" Although Bian Xiao spoke generously, Zhang Yan made a rough calculation and found that it would take at least 3 days to completely decipher this Taoist book even if he didn't sleep or rest. He couldn't help but sneer. At this moment, if it was someone else, they would indeed be stumped. But if it was him, he reached out and grasped the remnant of the jade hidden in his sleeve. His mind sank into it. Soon, his consciousness arrived in a strange space. This was the greatest secret of this remnant of the jade. There was a clone of himself in the jade. Not only did it look exactly the same, but its senses and spirit were also completely identical. It was like a mirror image of the original body. As soon as his mind entered the remnant of the jade, the originally motionless self immediately became lively, as if it had suddenly come to life. Even if this clone sat or lay down, it would not affect his original body. They were both independent of each other, but also integrated into one body. The most amazing thing about this was that the time and space inside the jade was not synchronized with the outside world. He had used the method of silently reciting scriptures to calculate the time and roughly deduced that 1 day in the jade was equivalent to 10 days in the outside world. With this remnant of the jade, he could use 10 times the time to think and learn. No one could compare to him when it came to deducing the eroded characters. Zhang Yan silently looked at the time. It was about noon now, which was around 10 o'clock in the morning. By night time, it would be about 12 hours. If he calculated it by 10 times, that would be 120 hours. To him, that was a full 5 days. He smiled and sat upright in the jade. Using his hand as a token, he began to pinch his fingers to calculate the 16 characters. Chapter 6. At the end of the hour, the 64 incantations that Zhang Yan had deciphered were placed in front of Bian Xiao. Cold sweat dripped down from Bian Xiao's forehead. To be honest, he could not understand one or two of these incantations, but Hu Xinyu had personally said that there were 64 incantations in total. Now that Zhang Yan's incantation secretly matched Hu Xinyu's words, it was enough to prove that he could really understand the true meaning of the incantation. His hands and his sleeves were trembling slightly. Obviously he knew that he had suffered a great defeat, but his mouth was still strong. He said, "This Menk Jing Shi is profound and abstruse, Shidi's interpretation is fast, but I still don't know if there is any mistake in it. Wait until I get it to Hu Shixiang, then we can verify the authenticity." Seeing that Bian Xiao had clearly lost, yet he still refused to admit it, the surrounding spectators looked at him with gazes filled with disdain, and there were even some who ridiculed him. Although Bian Xiao's chest was boiling with anger, on the surface, he could only pretend that he did not hear it, but in his heart, he was secretly hating, and thought to himself, "This time, I will let you be happy for a few days, it will not be too late to deal with you later." Zhang Yan sneered, and said, "In this case, this incantation will be left with me, and it will not be too late to find me after Steward Bian has verified the authenticity. I will take my leave." He actually put the thin paper with the incantation and the pill into his sleeve, and without saying a word, he got up and left. Bian Xiao never thought that Zhang Yan would leave just like that. He got up and chased a few steps, looking at Zhang Yan's back. He wanted to speak a few times, but he swallowed his words. He thought of Hu Xinyu asking him for this incantation in the future, but he could not take it out. His face suddenly turned pale, and he did not pay attention to the steps of the pavilion under his feet. He staggered, and almost fell to the ground. Although he did not make a fool of himself because of the support of the servants on both sides, he still lost a lot of face. He did not dare to stay here for a moment longer, and hurriedly left. Today, he made Bian Xiao suffer a loss, but Zhang Yan did not feel happy in his heart. Bian Xiao was just a servant. Although this person had followed Hu Xinyu for a long time, his eyes were cloudy and his breathing heavy. With a single glance, one could tell that he did not have any cultivation. Although his hair was black and his teeth were healthy, Zhang Yan could conclude that it was because he had been taking good pills for a long time. A person's life was only 100 years long. If they were only busy for the sake of gold and silver, in the end, wouldn't they end up with nothing? He didn't even know that he was in a treasure trove. He was just a rat who was greedy for the small benefits in front of him. However, he had heard that Hu Xinyu was an extremely protective person. Now that he had offended his steward, how would he react? Zhang Yan smiled. He had already considered the consequences and had a plan to deal with it. Shaking his head, he put this matter to the back of his mind and focused on sorting out the harvest of the day. After all, the content of the Taoist calligraphy technique that Bian Xiao brought was not something that ordinary people could see, so it was a good thing for him. After all, improving his cultivation was his foundation. However, he did not expect that the consequences of this matter would be much greater than he had imagined. In just a few days, his reputation had spread throughout the entire Azure Parasol Mountain. The disciples of the Three Views came to visit him one after another, but there were only a few of them who were really important. At first, Zhang Yan still received them patiently, but later on, he felt annoyed and simply said that he was comprehending the technique in closed-door cultivation and did not want to read the Taoist books. Only then did he calm down a lot. On this day, Zhang Yan fiddled with the broken jade in his hand. He faintly felt that there seemed to be a lot of secrets in this jade that had not been unearthed. Previously, his cultivation was low, so he could not confirm many of his conjectures. Just as he was about to test the idea in his heart, someone gently knocked on the door from outside. Zhang Yan could not help but be surprised. Ever since he said that he was in closed-door cultivation, very few people came to visit him. "Which senior brother is outside the door?" The person outside called out softly, "Young master, I'm Zhang Shi." Zhang Yan was delighted and said, "Oh, it's Uncle Shi. Come in quickly." He got up to open the door and saw an honest-looking middle-aged man in his early 40s standing at the door. Zhang Shi was the only servant he had brought with him before he went to Azure Parasol Mountain. Zhang Shi had grown up in his residence and was a kind and honest person. He was originally his father's servant, but in his memory, his predecessor had never treated him as a servant. Instead, he had treated him like an uncle or an elder. After Zhang Yan went up the mountain, Zhang Shi had been living at the foot of the mountain. The day before yesterday, when he had received a lot of food, he had sent people to deliver a lot of it. However, Zhang Shi looked distressed as if he had something on his mind. Zhang Yan looked at his expression and asked with concern, "Uncle Shi, it's cold on the mountain at night. Why did you come up at this time?" Zhang Shi lowered his head and said, "I haven't seen young master for 3 months. It's cold now, and young master's body has always been weak. This old servant is worried, so I came up to take a look." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "We cultivators eat wind and drink dew, so we're not affected by heat or cold. Uncle Shi, there's no need to worry." Zhang Shi glanced at Zhang Yan and looked like he wanted to say something. "Uncle Yang, you came at the right time. Stay here tonight and tell me some interesting things about the foot of the mountain. Azure Parasol Mountain has many beautiful sceneries, and I'll bring some food with me to go down the mountain another day." Zhang Yan could naturally see that Zhang Shi had other reasons for going up the mountain, but he was a shrewd person, so he didn't rush to ask and just greeted him. Seeing that Zhang Yan was about to go inside, Zhang Shi suddenly pulled his sleeve and said, "Ah, young master, this old servant has something to say." Zhang Yan turned around and said gently, "Uncle Shi, you've raised me since I was young, so there's no harm in saying what you want to say." Zhang Shi sighed repeatedly and said, "Young master has been on Azure Parasol Mountain for 3 years. Counting with your fingers, how many people have become immortals? The old master was once the governor of Yunzhou, and before he died, he had high hopes for you, hoping that you could bring glory to the family. You should be studying and taking exams, so how can you waste your time here?" However, Zhang Yan laughed. He took 2 steps forward and stood still. He stretched out a hand and pointed at the top of the cave wall, saying, "Uncle Shi, look. This poem has been with me for 3 years, but I didn't recognize it. Now that I've seen it, it's deeply in my heart." Zhang Shi was surprised that Zhang Yan would suddenly talk about poetry, but since the young master was interested in poetry, of course he was happy to see it happen. He had also read poetry books before, so he went over to take a look and found that the date of the poem's inscription was the 1st year of Yongping, so he knew that it had been 133 years since then. However, the handwriting was so deep in the stone wall that it was better than when it was first carved. He slowly recited, "In the golden palace, bones and yellow mud grave, with half a cup of muddy wine as a sacrifice to the Duke and Marquis. Today, after a golden millet dream, I only ask about immortals and not worry." Zhang Yan sighed with emotion. "Today, after a golden millet dream, I only ask about immortals and not worry. Well said, well said. Uncle Shi, look, this is the portrayal of my, Zhang Yan's, heart. The heavens did not forsake men, and they were reborn. The path of Tao in this life was suddenly before them. How could he waste the opportunity given to him by the heavens to go back and covet the riches of the mortal world?" Zhang Shi shook his head dejectedly. The young master had read too many fairy tales and was deeply poisoned by them. How could he believe in the illusory fairy tales? He sighed and said, "Young master, your aptitude is not high, and you have no hope of becoming an immortal." "Why do you, my aptitude is not high?" Zhang Yan's expression, which was originally calm, changed slightly. He frowned slightly and said, "Uncle Shi, where did you hear this from?" Yang Shi was startled, as if he felt that he had said something wrong. He immediately hesitated and didn't dare to speak. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed. He sighed and said, "When you came, what did the Zhou family say to you?" Zhang Shi didn't hesitate and said, "The Zhou family said," before he could finish, his face paled. He instantly knew that he had let the cat out of the bag. His lips trembled a few times, and he knelt down with a thud. He pulled on Zhang Yan's robe and said in a sobbing voice, young master, the Zhou family found me and said that they know that you are cultivating here. They asked me to advise you to leave the mountain, or else you will have a taste of the Zhou family's power. Young master, the Zhou family is powerful, we can't afford to offend them. As expected, the Zhou family had come to find him. A bright light flashed in Zhang Yan's eyes. He shook his head and said, Uncle Shi, you've been tricked. If the Zhou family knew where I was, why would they need to find you? Isn't that unnecessary? What? Zhang Shi was stunned. Young master, are you saying that the Zhou family doesn't know that you're here? Zhang Yan sneered and said, they probably knew that I was in the Azure Parasol Mountain, but this isn't their backyard, so it would take them some effort to find me. However, now that you're here, they can naturally find me easily. Ah. Ha, brother-in-law, you've improved a lot after being on the mountain for a few years. Following a long laugh, a handsome young man in a white robe walked in. He had a pair of long and narrow eyes, a straight nose, and a thin mouth. There was a sense of arrogance in between his brows. He looked at Zhang Yan a few times with a scrutinizing gaze, then suddenly smiled and said, brother-in-law, there are countless obstacles in the pursuit of immortality. With your aptitude, your achievements in this lifetime will be limited. With my elder sister above you, she can naturally protect you for a lifetime of peace and prosperity. Why do you want to stay in this mountain with the cold dew and weeds? It's better to return home and take good care of your parents from now on. Live the rest of your life as an ordinary person. Wouldn't that be great? Without waiting for Zhang Yan to speak, he smiled again and said, although you came up the mountain without permission this time, your parents and family know that you were bewitched by others, so they won't blame you. Hurry up and return with me. His words sounded like advice, but his tone was unquestionable. Zhang Yan smiled faintly and said, parents and family? Whose parents? Whose family? Speaking of which, his predecessor's experience was also strange. 3 years ago, when he was 16 years old, he married Zhou Yuchu, the young lady of the Zhou family from the Zhou family in Dingyang. After the wedding ceremony, the bride in the bridal room shone brilliantly and claimed that she was the reincarnation of a goddess. Now that she was full of grievances and was about to ascend to heaven, she asked him to take care of his parents in this life, and after 100 years, she would send him to heaven to enjoy bliss with them. Zhang Yan's predecessor also listened to these words. Although his wife's family was arrogant and often ordered the servants around like slaves, he still had no regrets and served the parents of the goddess wholeheartedly, only hoping that one day he could enjoy the bliss of heaven. However, one day, a Daoran came and stood at the door, laughing coldly and giving him some pointers. Only then did he realize that she was not a celestial goddess, but a cultivator of qi. Although there was no difference between the two in the eyes of ordinary people, after hearing Doran's explanation, he then realized that cultivators of qi were just training their spirits to reach the Tao, and it was ridiculous to call themselves celestials of heaven. Zhou Yuchu was originally the disciple of Venerable Lingya in Yuxiao school. In order to cultivate the Tao, she used a wonderful method to reincarnate and cross the tribulation. However, if no one took care of her parents in this life, she would be dissatisfied and it would hinder her cultivation. Therefore, she found Zhang Yan, an orphan who had no parents and a vast farmland at home, to support her parents and make up for the Tao. If it wasn't for Daoran who pointed out the mystery, Zhang Yan would not only marry a wife in name, but he would also have to work hard to support his wife's family. Not only would he suffer on behalf of others, but he would also end up empty-handed in the end. When the 16-year-old Zhang Yan learned the truth, he angrily accepted Doran's guidance and came to Mount Kanggu, vowing to seek justice. Although Zhou Youchu's parents in this life were direct descendants of Venerable Lingya, they were still mortals after all, so they didn't know about the hindrances in this life. They could not wait for Zhang Yan to leave so that they could swallow up the Zhang family's farmland. Therefore, Zhou Yuchu didn't know that Zhang Yan had left for 3 years. Until a few days ago, when she was meditating, she suddenly felt that the soul manipulation technique she cast on Zhang Yan's body had suddenly disappeared. Only then did she realize that something was wrong. After asking the Zhou family, she found out that Zhang Yan had already left for 3 years. However, the strange thing was that Zhou Yuchu actually couldn't calculate Zhang Yan's whereabouts. It seemed that an expert had concealed the heavenly secret, and Venerable Lingye had been in closed-door meditation for many years, so he couldn't ask Zhou Yuchu to calculate. In desperation, he ordered his third brother, Zhou Zishang, who was also cultivating on the mountain, to go down the mountain to investigate. Zhou Zishang did not dare to neglect. Zhang Yan was of great importance. It was related to whether his second sister could cultivate a superior cultivation method, so he had to be cautious. Although he couldn't find Zhang Yan, he didn't know that Zhang Yan had left with Zhang Shi. Sure enough, after some calculations, Zhou Zishang soon found Zhang Shi at the foot of the Azure Wu Mountain. Because he was afraid that Zhang Shi would not reveal Zhang Yan's whereabouts, he ordered a servant to probe Zhang Shi. Sure enough, Zhang Shi went up the mountain in fear. Zhou Zishang, who was behind him, easily found Zhang Yan's residence. Knowing that Zhang Yan really was cultivating on the mountain, Zhou Zishang couldn't help but feel surprised. Once Zhang Yan succeeded in his cultivation, the loss of the heavenly Tao would naturally fall back on his eldest sister, Zhou Yuchu. In this way, all of his previous efforts would go down the drain. Zhou Zishang originally wanted to directly tie up Zhang Yan and go down the mountain, but when he saw that Zhang Yan's aura was soft and smooth like jade, it was clear that he had already reached the essence-building realm. Although he spoke with disdain, he was actually a little surprised in his heart. Could it be that Zhang Yan was valued by a certain guru on the Azure Wu Mountain? If that was the case, then it would be difficult. Zhang Yan was now a disciple of the Qinsang school. If he were to be easily abducted, then he feared that it would lead to discord between the two factions. Moreover, Zhang Yan coming up the mountain was strange. Who was the one who instigated him behind the scenes was still unknown. After thinking about it, Zhou Zishang decided to use a gentle method to force Zhang Yan to go down the mountain. However, now that he heard Zhang Yan say the words, whose parents, whose family, with a hint of ridicule in his indifferent tone, and not even a shred of fear, Zhou Zishang could not help but feel bewildered in his heart. He even suspected that there was someone behind Zhang Yan, otherwise how could he have such courage? He secretly speculated that that person was most likely an enemy of Venerable Lingye. He certainly could not afford to provoke such a person. However, he could not give up on this matter. Moreover, it was rare for him to go down the mountain, so he wanted to use this matter to let his master have a good look at his own means. Zhou Zishang slightly frowned, but did not get angry. He no longer tried to persuade him, and without saying a word, turned around and walked away. From the moment Zhou Zishang entered the door to the moment he left, from the beginning to the end, Zhang Yan's expression remained the same, but Zhang Shi, who was standing next to him, had a panicked look on his face. Zhang Yan looked thoughtful. This Zhou Zishang unexpectedly did not waste his breath to force him to go down the mountain, and instead just retreated. He did not believe that the Zhou family would give up so easily. It seemed that this cheap brother-in-law of his was not a simple person, and there should be a bigger backup waiting for him. He was very clear that if Zhou Yuchu wanted to cultivate a superior Taoist method, she would not allow herself to become an immortal. There was no possibility of compromise between the two sides. Zhang Yan looked at the gloomy sky outside, thinking that after today, the pressure from the Zhou family would probably come like a storm. Fortunately, his grand plan had already begun ahead of time. If Zhou Zishang came a few days earlier, it would really be difficult for him to deal with. Thinking of this, he smiled confidently. There was one thing that Zhou Zishang said was right: there were tens of thousands of ups and downs and thousands of obstacles in the pursuit of Taoism. This did not only refer to the obstacles in Taoism, but also the confrontation and competition between people. Was killing and fighting not one of them? If he could not even pass this obstacle, then how could he talk about Taoism? Chapter 7. Senior Apprentice Brother AI. If this matter were to be known by the young master, he would definitely not spare this Bien's life. I ask Senior Apprentice Brother AI to save this Bien. Bian Xiao said as he bowed to the young man in front of him. The matter in front of the Thousand Zhang Cliff had caused quite an uproar. Almost all the disciples of the Three Views lower courtyard knew about it. However, Bian Xiao losing face was a small matter. Hu Xingyu originally had another use for the scripture. He had only used it to embarrass Zhang Yan that day, but he did not expect that Zhang Yan would use this as an excuse to take it away, which was equivalent to grabbing his life. He had the heart to take it back, but the people around him bullied the ordinary disciples, but against an essence-building cultivator like Zhang Yan, it was undoubtedly a disgrace. Fortunately, Hu Xingyu was in closed-door cultivation all year round, and was a proud and aloof person, so he did not have many friends, so no one had mentioned this matter in front of him. Therefore, today Bian Xiao specifically came to ask the famous Three Views lower courtyard's Ai Zhongwen to come forward and mediate, in order to take back the scripture. In any case, he had to pass this hurdle first. Although Ai Zhongwen was only a registered disciple, but he came from the profound Gate aristocratic family in Fang's Ai clan. Secondly, he had a wide network of friends, and thirdly, he and Zhang Yan were both disciples of the Good Abyss Monastery. Moreover, the head of the upper courtyard, Shi Shoujing, was interested in accepting him as a disciple, so sooner or later he would become an inner disciple, so most of the people in the Three Views upper courtyard were willing to give him face. Ai Zhongwen smiled and said, "Senior apprentice brother Bian, don't worry, let me first ask about this Zhang Yan's origin." He waved his hand, and the long follower beside him understood. He took out a name list from the bookshelf behind him, flipped through it, and said, "Zhang Yan, Donghua Dingyang, came to the mountain in the 17th year of Cheng'an." Ai Zhongwen was surprised and said, "That's it?" The long follower nodded. Ai Zhongwen was deep in thought. Although there were many geniuses in the world of cultivation who were proficient in erosive writings, most of them were disciples of the Xianmen families. This was because their families taught them how to decipher Taoist books. Since Zhang Yan was proficient in erosive writings, he must have some background. But why hadn't he heard of him before? At this moment, a disdainful voice sounded beside him, "So it's just a nameless brat. I thought he had 3 heads and 6 arms. I don't know where he obtained a superior deduction technique, but he actually dared to humiliate Brother Bian." "Brother Bian, don't worry, your problem is naturally my problem. I will help you seek justice and teach that brat the rules." Bian Xiao was overjoyed when he heard this, and he immediately bowed and said, "If Senior Brother Lin is willing to step forward, I will naturally be extremely grateful, and I will send a generous gift after the matter is completed." Senior apprentice brother Lin was originally called Lin Tong. He had an elder brother, Lin Yuan, who was a disciple of the Good Abyss Monastery. He had always been on good terms with Ai Zhongwen. This time, he had come to Ai Zhongwen's house to drink and happened to run into this matter. Ai Zhongwen glanced at Lin Tong, and reminded him, "I heard that Zhang Yan has also reached the essence-building realm. Senior apprentice brother Lin must not underestimate this person." Lin Tong laughed and said, "I have been on the mountain for 9 years, and have received pointers from my elder brother, Lin Yuan, until 2 years ago. Just now, how long has it been since Zhang Yan ascended the mountain? I think that most of it is just a rumor, an exaggeration." Bian Xiao's eyes flickered. He had personally witnessed Zhang Yan's cultivation that day, so he was absolutely not wrong. But at this moment in front of Lin Tong, it was inconvenient for him to say it out loud. But in his heart, he was secretly happy. If Lin Tong stepped forward, then no matter what the final outcome was, that little thief Zhang Yan would not be able to get away with it. If he could provoke Lin Yuan, then that would be even better. Ai Zhongwen frowned and did not speak. On the other side, Lin Tong did not care so much. He had always been arrogant, and the Lin family was also a noble family of the Great Wei dynasty. Coupled with the fact that he had Lin Yuan as his backer in the Azure Parasol Mountain, he had developed a habit of looking down on others, so how could he put Zhang Yan in his eyes? Immediately, under the influence of alcohol, he pulled Ai Zhongwen out of the door, and before leaving, he said, "Senior apprentice brother Bian, please wait here for my good news, ha." Ai Zhongwen was not as optimistic as Lin Tong. When he first heard that Zhang Yan had been able to decipher 3 Taoist books of different origins in one day, and that he did not even need to use the bamboo chips to deduce them, he was also greatly surprised. It must be known that ordinary Taoist books were easy to decipher, but profound and complicated Taoist books always took a long time to decipher. For example, a Taoist book of several thousand characters would often take 7 or 8 years to decipher. He himself had a copy of the Heart's Questions, and after carefully deducing it, it took him 5 days to decipher all 3,612 characters. This was enough for him to be proud of his peers, but compared to Zhang Yan, he was still far inferior. He had heard that there were some geniuses in this world who could decipher the erosion runes just by relying on their talent and perception, but he had never seen one. Could this Zhang Yan be one of them? Other than that, there were 2 other possibilities. One was that Zhang Yan had recently caught the eye of an expert and obtained a secret divination technique, and the other was that Zhang Yan had concealed his origin. It made sense for him to think this way. As long as one's divination technique was profound enough, it was not difficult to decipher a Taoist book, even if one's perception was poor. However, this kind of technique was not something ordinary people could obtain. Currently, most of it was in the hands of the major Taoist families, and each family had their own unique technique to decipher the erosion runes. The deeper the family's heritage, the more profound the technique would be. What he did not know was that although Zhang Yan did not have a profound technique, he was extremely talented in deciphering the erosion runes. Secondly, he had 10 times the time of others to calculate. Even if his technique was inferior, it was enough to close the gap. In Ai Zhongwen's view, if Zhang Yan was from a Taoist family, even if it was in decline, it would not be strange for him to have such accomplishments. But what if the first deduction was true? The expert in the monastery, Ai Zhongwen's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that his teacher was extremely calm and lively and wanted to take in another disciple? Zhang Yan had been a nobody for 3 years on the mountain, but now he had shocked the world with a single feat. The more he thought about it, the more likely it was. As he thought about it, his footsteps fell behind. The impatient Lin Tong gradually pulled away from him. Lin Tong was about to step onto the plank path leading to Zhang Yan's cave residence when he raised his head and saw a person walking toward him. He said impatiently, "Who's blocking the way?" "A good dog doesn't block the way." "Why aren't you getting out of the way?" The person in front of him snorted coldly. Ai Zhongwen suddenly felt his heart palpitate and hurriedly stopped. Seeing that Lin Tong was already lying on the ground, he couldn't help but be shocked. He blurted out, "Fellow Taoist, please stay." The person glanced coldly at Ai Zhongwen. Ai Zhongwen felt as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head. The chill seeped into his lungs, and his limbs stiffened. Luckily, the person didn't say anything else and directly walked past him. Ai Zhongwen stared blankly at the person's back. After a while, he went forward and helped Lin Tong up. He asked, "Brother Lin, are you all right?" Lin Tong sat up in a daze. At that time, he only felt the world spin around him. When he came back to his senses, he was already lying on the mountain path for no reason. He patted his head, his eyes filled with shock. He said, "Senior brother Ai, who was that? Such a high cultivation." Although he was arrogant, he also knew that he had met a fellow Taoist with a high cultivation. Ai Zhongwen's expression was grave. Just now, there were faint rosy clouds swirling around the person's body. It was clearly a phenomenon that would only appear after opening the meridian channels. Compared to people like them, they were already on a completely different level. When he thought of this, he also felt a lingering fear. However, he felt that the person seemed somewhat familiar. He thought to himself, looking at this person's face, "Isn't it Zhou Zishang from the Dingyang Zhou clan?" Last year, he followed his grandfather to the Donghua Continent sect conference and saw Zhou Zishang from afar. After all, Yuxiao School was not inferior to Qinsang School. However, the two people's positions were like heaven and earth. Zhou Zishang was the direct disciple of an elder, and the Zhou clan was a Xianmen aristocratic family. Although AI Zhongwen was from the Anfeng AI clan, he was only from a branch family. He didn't have the right to go up and chat with him. He looked in front of him. Why was this Zhou Zishang here? Could it be that he was here to visit Zhang Yan? This thought made him jump in fright. Who was this Zhang Yan that even Zhou Zishang had to pay a visit to him? Could it be that his previous deduction was wrong? Was Zhang Yan actually hiding his strength? Taking a deep breath, AI Zhongwen had a plan in mind. He said, Senior Lin, although this fellow cultivator didn't use too much force just now, he might still have some hidden injuries. It's better to go back and check it out. Senior Bian, how about I take care of this matter? Lin Tong hesitated. Although he had boasted in front of Bian Xiao, his life was still more important. He forced a smile and said, if that's the case, then I'll have to trouble junior brother to make a trip. AI Zhongwen cupped his hands and didn't say anything more. After watching Lin Yuan leave, he followed the plank path to search for Zhang Yan's residence. Not long after, he heard a deep voice asking, which senior brother is it outside? Not long after Zhou Zishang left, Zhang Yan had been paying attention to the movements outside in case Zhou Zishang left someone to spy on him. At this time, he heard the footsteps outside. But the sound was steady and powerful, so he took the initiative to ask. AI Zhongwen tidied up his clothes. Before he could speak, he saw a shadow flash, and a person had already walked out. Is it senior brother Zhang? AI Zhongwen took a step back and looked up and down. He couldn't help but praise, senior brother really is as handsome as the rumors say. Although Zhang Yan was only wearing an ordinary coarse gown, in terms of appearance and figure, few people AI Zhongwen had seen could compare. Not only that, but the other's eyes were oppressive, and there was a faint sense of oppression. If it wasn't for the fact that he was standing at the side of the plank path, AI Zhongwen couldn't help but take a few more steps back. When it came to choosing a husband for the daughter of the Zhou family, they first looked at fate, then looked at appearance, and finally chose Zhang Yan from a million people. This was enough to show that his body was full of capital. Zhang Yan smiled and said, Senior brother is too kind. I am Zhang Yan. How should I address this senior brother? AI Zhongwen laughed heartily and said, It's just AI Zhongwen. Oh. Zhang Yan's expression slightly changed. He carefully looked at the person in front of him and said, I have long heard of senior brother's name. He had heard of AI Zhongwen's name. It was said that this person had a wide network. Moreover, when ordinary disciples encountered difficulties, they would ask him for help. His reputation in the Azure Parasol Mountain was very good. It was the polar opposite of Bian Xiao, but the two of them seemed to have a little friendship. This person's appearance was not outstanding. He had a medium build and could be regarded as strong and powerful. At first glance, he might be regarded as a passerby, but his voice was deep and full of magnetism. Listening to it, people could not help but have a good impression of him. Moreover, his skin was as warm as jade, and his eyes flashed with a glimmer of light. Obviously, he also had the cultivation of essence-building realm. Zhang Yan secretly guessed the purpose of AI Zhongwen's visit and said, Senior brother AI, please come inside. The immortal cave is cold and damp, please don't take offense. AI Zhongwen chuckled and waved his hand, saying, I am an immortal cultivator and sleep with the sun and the moon. How can I be so arrogant? He did not stand on ceremony and strode inside. Halfway through, he suddenly turned around and said, I heard that senior brother is very good at deciphering erosion runes. I recently found a book called Glory Inquiring Technique, and I would like to ask senior brother to take a look. If you learn anything, please give me a pointer or two. He took out a Taoist book and handed it to Zhang Yan. I also know that senior brother has been in seclusion for the past few days, so I dare not force you. I will leave this book with senior brother. It won't be too late to talk about it when you have the time. Zhang Yan's expression slightly changed, and his mouth slightly curved. This AI Zhongwen's words were polite, but in fact, he was clearly giving him the Taoist book in the name of deciphering erosion runes. This was a means of making friends, but the other party was free and easy, so it did not arouse his disgust. Moreover, this person was indeed worth befriending. He did not act pretentiously and immediately reached out to take the book, saying a few polite words, and made a "please" gesture. After the two sat down and chatted for a while, Ai Zhongwen suddenly asked, "Junior brother, when I came here just now, I saw a familiar face. Is he also here to visit junior brother Zhang?" Zhang Yan suddenly understood. No wonder Ai Zhongwen was so polite to him. It turned out that his roots were here. But on second thought, if he became friends with someone like Ai Zhongwen, he might have to enter their circle in the future. Without an identity, he would inevitably be in a much weaker position. Since the Zhou family was using him, why not borrow the Zhou family's name for the time being? He would just take it as collecting some interest. "Senior brother, are you talking about Zhou Zishang?" Senior brother knows Zhou family San Lang. Although he had expected this, Ai Zhongwen could not help but be surprised. Zhang Yan's expression was calm. He said, "How could I not know? Sister San Lang is my official wife." Chapter 8. Ai Zhongwen was shocked. He had thought of all kinds of possibilities, but he never imagined that Zhang Yan and Zhou Zishang were actually related. The Dingyang Zhou clan could be said to be extremely prominent in the Donghua continent. As far as he knew, in the past 100 years, there were no less than 10 cultivators above the nascent Soul realm. To be able to marry the daughter of the Zhou clan, this Zhang Yan's background was obviously not simple. However, Zhang Yan did not mention his background, so he naturally did not continue to ask. At this moment, the way Ai Zhongwen looked at Zhang Yan was different from before. Although his attitude was also very polite when they first met, the reservation that came from both his body and mind could not be erased. However, at this moment, he clearly placed Zhang Yan in the same position as a disciple of a Xianmen aristocratic family, perhaps even slightly higher. Zhang Yan observed coldly and sighed in his heart. Although the cultivation world mostly looked at people based on their level of cultivation, it also paid attention to one's background. Nowadays, Xianmen aristocratic families were all over the major cultivation sects, and such people had already firmly controlled the superior path of cultivation. For disciples who were not from aristocratic families, even if they were talented, it would still be difficult for them to stand out without excellent opportunities. Thinking of this, he secretly promised himself that if he was successful in cultivation one day, he would definitely find a way to change this situation. Because both of them wanted to make friends, they chatted happily after a few sentences. At this moment, Ai Zhongwen changed the topic and said, "Senior brother, do you know about the Xianwen spell conference?" Zhang Yan's expression was indifferent. He put down the teacup in his hand and nodded. "How can I not know? Such a grand event only happens once every 3 years. I originally wanted to go and take a look, but I only focused on cultivation in the 3 years I came up the mountain and did not make friends with others, so I could not enter. There were 16 major sects in the Donghua continent and countless small sections. Every 3 years, there would be a Xianwen spell conference among the lower houses of each sect. At that time, famous and outstanding cultivators from the lower houses of each sect, regardless of whether they were new disciples or registered disciples, would come to exchange cultivation experiences. This year, it was Kangwu Mountain's turn to host the conference. The reason why the Dharma assembly was named Xianwen was because of the eroded characters. Since the creation of the world, the mountains, rivers, and the surface of the earth had undergone the natural evolution of millions of years. After being exposed to the sun and the wind, a vast and profound diagram of latitude and longitude was formed on it. The secrets of the world contained within the diagram were calculated and organized by the ancient Taoists, and only then did they gradually form into the characters in the ancient books unique to the cultivators. Legend had it that in ancient times, cultivators could enter the Grand Tao and ascend to the heavens just by comprehending the erosion runes. Although this was only a rumor, it was enough to prove that the corrosive runes were the foundation of the Great Tao. If one could comprehend the corrosive runes, then the gate of immortality would be in sight. In ancient times, when cultivators cultivated the Tao, they would first learn the erosion runes before cultivating the Xian techniques. However, this method of cultivation was incomparably slow, and whether or not one could achieve anything depended entirely on one's talent in the art of erosion runes. Therefore, after the gradual rise of the aristocratic families in the Celestial Sect of Wonders, the disciples of the Celestial Sect of Wonders no longer followed this path. This was because when they first learned the Tao, they already had the guidance of their elders. Not only could they avoid taking the wrong path, but they also didn't have to carefully study the erosion runes. They only needed to follow the instructions of their elders step by step. Not only would they have a solid foundation, but they also wouldn't have to worry about making mistakes. When their cultivation gradually increased, they could go back and study the erosion runes. This was also one of the reasons why Ai Zhongwen believed that Zhang Yan's background wasn't simple. Cultivators who didn't come from an aristocratic family would spend their limited time cultivating the Tao, so why would they spend more time studying the erosion runes? It could be said that there was no one like Zhang Yan's predecessor who studied the erosion runes step by step. But now, competing and deducing the erosion runes at the Xianwen assembly had become a method for the aristocratic families to measure the strength of their own family. It was no longer used for cultivation. Ai Zhongwen secretly looked at Zhang Yan's expression. Although he said it was a pity, he didn't seem to take it to heart. For a moment, Ai Zhongwen couldn't guess what he was thinking. He probed, "To be honest, junior brother, I came here today with the intention of inviting junior brother to attend the assembly. With junior brother's attainment in erosion runes, how could you not show off your skills at the assembly?" Zhang Yan glanced at Ai Zhongwen and said with a smile, "Since senior brother Ai invited me to go with you, how can I refuse?" Ai Zhongwen let out a sigh of relief. He took out a bronze token and presented it with both hands. "This is a token of the assembly. You can enter the mountain with it." After hesitating for a moment, he took out a bottle of medicinal pills and placed it on the table. He cupped his hands together and said, "This is a bottle of positive source pills for smoothing the qi and regulating the meridians. There are heavenly spirits inside. This is senior brother Bian's apology. I hope senior brother will accept it." As soon as he finished speaking, he didn't wait for Zhang Yan to speak before he bowed once more and said, "Senior brother Bian and I have some friendship. He was impetuous a few days ago and offended senior brother Zhang, so he asked me to apologize repeatedly. I hope senior brother can forgive him." Zhang Yan understood Ai Zhongwen's intentions. How could he not know what Ai Zhongwen was planning? But since he had taken a Taoist book from Ai Zhongwen, he naturally had to return the favor. After a moment of silence, he deliberately sighed and said, "I have long since stopped caring about such a small matter. That day, I was just angry that Bian Xiao had used senior brother Hu to pressure me." Ai Zhongwen smiled. "With senior brother's status, why should you lower yourself to the level of a servant?" "Oh." Zhang Yan took out the page of scriptures and handed it to Ai Zhongwen. Since his goal had been achieved, and it was getting late, and Zhang Yan wanted to send him off, Ai Zhongwen did not want to stay any longer. After a few more words, he bid farewell and left. After sending Ai Zhongwen off, Zhang Yan returned to his cave residence. He took out the bronze plate and looked at it. Even with his composure, he could not help but feel happy. Ai Zhongwen did not know that this Xianwen Dharma assembly was his real goal. It could be said that Zhang Yan had put in so much effort just for this assembly. However, not everyone could participate in the assembly. Even if he wanted to go, he needed someone to recommend him. He was just a nominal disciple without any connections or cultivation. The reason why he was so high profile before was because he wanted to use his outstanding ability in deciphering the eroded runes as a stepping stone to gain the qualification to participate in this assembly. Once he became famous in the assembly, the significance would be completely different from before. To put it bluntly, with his current status, even if he was famous, he would only be famous among the nominal disciples. Perhaps there would occasionally be people like Ai Zhongwen who would appreciate him, but those inner disciples would not really look up to him. But if it was a Dharma assembly, it would be a completely different story. It was a gathering of the elite disciples of the 16 major sections. To put it bluntly, perhaps in the future, the elders and heads of the major sects would appear among these people. The difference in influence would not be small. Once he became famous at the Dharma assembly, the guru of the monastery would first consider him when accepting disciples. Seeing that his goal had been achieved, Zhang Yan was in a good mood. He took out the Lin Yao questioning method that Ai Zhongwen had given him in disguise and started reading it. Who knew that when he read it, he would be greatly surprised? It turned out that this Lin Yao questioning method was one of the 10 questions of the heart's heart. The content of it was related to the last step of the essence-building realm, Yuanqing entering true. It was obvious that Ai Zhongwen saw that his cultivation had already crossed the threshold of Yuanqing entering true, so he specially gave him this book to show his sincerity. Zhang Yan could not help but smile. The profound sect aristocratic families really had a deep heritage. This kind of precious Tao book was something that Zhang Yan did not even dare to think about before. It was only by chance that he was able to obtain this book, but they actually gave it away casually. Perhaps for them, this Tao book was not worth mentioning, but for a disciple like him, it was a genuine treasure. But not long after, this Taoist book made him frown. The eroding words were not difficult for him, but there were many terms that referred to the profound sect aristocratic families. Although Zhang Yan knew a little bit about it, but he was not from an authentic profound sect aristocratic family, so it was somewhat difficult for him to understand it. For example, there was the phrase, fighting ginseng, rui. Fighting ginseng, he knew that it was a term that referred to the qi in the main arteries. There were 3 types of qi rising and falling, and rui presumably referred to one of them, but the problem was, how would he know which one it was? This was not something that could be easily tested, and a careless mistake could easily occur. Therefore, this book was useless in his hands. But now, he had no choice but to practice it. He could not guarantee that Ai Zhongwen's intentions were as simple as they seemed. If there was a hidden purpose to test him, as long as he did not fully understand it, then there was no need to look at his cultivation. Just by answering his questions, he would be able to see through him. And if he wanted to participate in the spell assembly, he would meet Ai Zhongwen again sooner or later. Standing up, he paced back and forth a few times. His eyes flashed, and he sat down again, taking out the remnant of the jade from his sleeve. The doppelganger in the jade was no different from him. Previously, he tried to practice it, but cultivating the doppelganger did not improve his own cultivation. Later, he focused on deciphering the erosion inscriptions, so he did not delve into it. Now that he came back to his senses, he could not help but catch a glimpse of an idea. Sinking his mind into the remnant of the jade, his consciousness merged with the doppelganger, and he began to practice according to the mnemonics of the Lin Yao questioning method. At first, he passed the first 2 checkpoints smoothly, but when he reached the 3rd checkpoint, when his breath entered one of the meridians, he suddenly felt a pain in his chest, and his body suddenly became numb. He could not move, and he immediately knew that his qi meridian had gone awry. But he was not discouraged at all. Instead, he was very excited. This proved that his previous idea was feasible. This was just a doppelganger, and it did not affect his original body at all. So what if he went awry? At worst, he would have to start all over again. Moreover, the world in the jade was 10 times larger than the real world. He could easily understand the cultivation method in the jade, and then go back to his original body to practice. Zhang Yan calmed his mind and retracted his breath that had gone awry. He was ready to try again. However, after easily making this step, he made a new discovery. Since he could retract his breath, did that mean that the state of this doppelganger was completely dependent on his own thoughts? With this idea in mind, his curiosity was aroused, and he tried to directly control the doppelganger's cultivation. Sure enough, with the change of his thoughts, the doppelganger suddenly lost its cultivation, and was no different from an ordinary person. The next moment, the doppelganger's cultivation rose again, and in the blink of an eye, it jumped over the rudimentary Tao foundation and went straight to the essence-building realm. He tried to take another step forward, but he could no longer do so. This meant that the doppelganger could only evolve to the level of his current cultivation. But for him, this was not a small surprise. It meant that in the future, even without the guidance of a teacher, he could rely on himself to explore the way of cultivation. Chapter 9. With the help of the broken jade, the difficult problem in the Lin Yao questioning method was easily solved. After that, when Zhang Yan saw Xianmen terms such as Heng Ming, Kang, Zhuansu, Zheng, Busu, Shun, etc., he did not have to think too much and could just test the method in the jade. However, he did not blindly rely on the broken jade. Every time he encountered a problem that he could not solve, he would first combine what he had learned to infer and then verify it in the jade. Over time, he gradually found out some tricks and his understanding of these Tao formula terms deepened day by day. Sometimes, even without the broken jade, he still had some confidence in his heart. In less than 5 days, not only did he understand the entire Tao formula, he even roughly understood the various Xianmen terms used. It could be said that he had made great progress. This also made him feel that this broken jade was undoubtedly comparable to a divine object. That day, it fell to the ground with a meteor, so its origin was definitely not simple. At this moment, he suddenly had a strange thought. This jade was originally empty and there was nothing other than his doppelganger. However, since the doppelganger could change according to his thoughts, could the objects around him also exist and change in this broken jade? This idea was not whimsical, nor was it made out of nothing. It was based on the fact that his doppelganger in the jade was not naked, but wearing clothes. This style of clothing was one that he often wore. Since there were clothes, did it mean that other things could also exist? Thinking of this, he stretched out his hand and made a book gesture. In his mind, he was thinking about the Lin Yao questioning method. However, before he could figure out what it was, he suddenly felt annoyed and his consciousness went into a trance. He actually directly withdrew from the doppelganger and fell back into his original body. Zhang Yan suddenly opened his eyes. At that moment, he felt a splitting headache and his back was drenched in sweat. He could not help but be shocked. Ever since he cultivated qi, he had not felt this way for a long time. He quickly used his inner vision to check his body and realized that he seemed to have overworked himself. Not only was his spirit exhausted, but his inner qi was also severely depleted. Thinking about it, he guessed that this was caused by his attempt to conjure a Tao book in the jade. He nodded. It seemed that regardless of whether this attempt was feasible or not, it was not something he could do at the moment. However, he was not depressed. If he succeeded, he would be happy. If he failed, there was no need to care. If he tried to force it, he would end up creating obstacles in his heart. His Tao heart was perfect, and he was able to pick up and put it down. In the blink of an eye, he threw this matter to the back of his mind. He picked up the bottle of positive source pill that Ai Zhongwen had given him from the table, opened the bottle, and poured out a pill in his palm. He smelled a sweet fragrance seeping into his nose, and his chest and lungs immediately felt relaxed. He understood that this pill was extraordinary. He immediately opened his mouth and swallowed it. He sat in silence for a moment, waiting for the pill's power to dissolve. A warm flow of heat spread through his internal organs, making his whole body feel comfortable. Generally speaking, after taking this kind of pill, one had to circulate their qi to guide the pill's power throughout the body. Otherwise, once the pill's power accumulated, it would harm the body. He didn't dare to be negligent and immediately entered meditation. After half an hour, his qi reached perfection. At this time, the feeling of exhaustion was gone. The internal qi in his body surged, his essence root was full, and his divine qi was abundant. Unexpectedly, it was comparable to meditating for an entire night. Zhang Yan was secretly surprised. He knew that pills were very beneficial to cultivators, but he did not think that the effect would be so extraordinary. He had underestimated the effects of pills. It was no wonder that each and every one of the disciples from the profound sects were successful in reaching the essence-building realm. He was afraid that in addition to having good Tao books, they also had the assistance of pills. Unfortunately, he had very few pills in his hands. In the future, he could only swallow them at critical moments. He could not waste them at will. In his heart, he secretly made up his mind that he would have to pay more attention to the collection of pills in the future. If there was an opportunity, he would absolutely not let it go. However, what Zhang Yan did not know was that this bottle of upright source pills was considered high-grade in the profound sects. Ai Zhongwen was afraid that he would not return the scripture and deliberately wanted to befriend him, so he took the initiative to give it to him. If Ai Zhongwen knew that Zhang Yan treated the pills he kindly gave him as if they were cabbages, he feared that he would suffer from internal injuries. While Zhang Yan was cultivating in his cave, Zhou Zishang was listening to a servant inquire about news about him in a pavilion on the main peak of the Azure Wu Mountain, Haoju Peak. So, Zhang Yan has recently been deciphering the erosion runes on the Azure Wu Mountain and is now famous? A shrewd-looking servant obediently replied, reporting to young master, that is indeed the case. Zhou Zishang furrowed his brows in silence. His thoughts were shockingly similar to Ai Zhongwen's. He did not believe that Zhang Yan could decipher the erosion runes on his own. He concluded that there must be someone guiding him from behind. This person was either the deacon Taoist of the Good Abyss Monastery or the expert who encouraged him to come up the mountain. However, since that expert did not bring Zhang Yan with him to secretly teach him Tao techniques, it was most likely the latter. In this case, this Zhang Yan is even more untouchable. He knew that he could not handle this matter recklessly and had to use other methods. However, no matter what, Zhang Yan was only a lower house disciple. He had plenty of ways to make him obedient. The 3 servants he brought up the mountain had been waiting respectfully on both sides. One of them, a stout man who looked like a butler, came up and whispered, "Young master, do you need me?" The muscles on his face twitched as he made a grabbing gesture. Zhou Zishang raised his brows and waved his hand. "That's not appropriate. I, Zhou Zishang, am also a cultivator. Why would I use such a despicable method?" He then smiled confidently and said, "However, since I, Zhou Zishang, have come to Azure Parasol Mountain, how can I return empty-handed? Watch carefully, I will make Zhang Yan obediently descend the mountain in less than 3 months." The servants he brought up the mountain this time were all knowledgeable. Although they agreed with his words, they were still puzzled. They did not know where their young master's confidence came from. Zhou Zishang smiled but did not explain. After sitting for an hour, a Taoist boy came down from the mountain path. He hurriedly stopped in front of Zhou Zishang and bowed respectfully. "May I know which esteemed guest has come to our monastery?" The monastery master invites the esteemed guest to come in for a chat. Zhou Zishang stood up and tidied his clothes. With a slightly arrogant expression, he nodded and said, "Lead the way." The Taoist boy did not know Zhou Zishang's identity. He only knew that the monastery master had suddenly ordered him to descend the mountain to welcome an esteemed guest. How would he dare to say anything? He turned his body sideways and gestured for Zhou Zishang to lead the way obediently. Perhaps it was rare for others to meet the monastery master of Good Abyss Monastery, but with Zhou Zishang's cultivation base, as long as he sat here and released his aura, the monastery master would definitely sense it without saying anything. As a fellow cultivator of the same sect, the monastery master would definitely invite Zhou Zishang in no matter what. The journey to the foot of the mountain was slightly slow. After about 2 hours, the huge Xianwen stone in front of the monastery master came into view. There was no need to inform the Taoist boy as he led Zhou Zishang straight into the monastery gate. Good Abyss Monastery was arranged in a vertical axis according to the mountain. After passing through the monastery gate, there was a black tortoise tablet that was erected in the first year of the Wei dynasty's reign. Both sides were densely covered with ancient trees. Walking along the stone path, they passed through the Hall of Morality, the Hall of Tranquility, and the Hall of Three Luminaries before entering the monastery at the back. At this moment, there was a cobblestone path in front of them. On both sides, there were many potted green vines. It looked very interesting, like the scene of a celestial home. However, Zhou Zishang had no intention of looking at it. He followed the Taoist boy to the highest point of Haojue Peak, the Hall of Duzhen. As soon as he stepped into the main hall, he saw a white-haired and white-bearded Daoren sitting cross-legged on a cattail hassock in the main hall. Daoren opened his eyes slightly and waved his horsetail whisk. He said, "So it's a fellow cultivator of the Yuxiao school. I bow to you." Zhou Zishang did not return the greeting. He went straight to the point and said, "Today I have a matter to trouble fellow cultivator." As soon as the word, fellow cultivator, entered his ears and saw Zhou Zishang's disrespectful attitude, Doran's eyebrows twitched slightly. He said slowly, "Please speak clearly." Zhou Zishang stood with his hands behind his back and said condescendingly, "I'm Dingyang Zhou Zishang. The nominal disciple of the monastery, Zhang Yan, is my brother-in-law. We came up the mountain in a fit of pique because of family matters. Today, I'm here to bring him down the mountain." Doran's lips wriggled. He said expressionlessly, "The disciples of the monastery cultivate according to the original intention of their Taoist heart, chance, and spirituality. Daoren will never force them." This sentence seemed to be an irrelevant answer. In fact, the key was the original intention of the Taoist heart. His meaning was very clear. As long as Zhang Yan was unwilling, he would not force him to go down the mountain. Zhou Zishang smiled slightly. This result was already within his expectations. "If that's the case, then please give this Taoist book to my brother-in-law. I'm sure you won't refuse, right?" Zhou Zishang took out a thin silk book with both hands and handed it to Daoren. Daoren glanced at it. As soon as the words, "Records of Internal Meditation of Xianyuan," entered his eyelids twitched. After pondering for a while, he reached out his hand to take the book. He said lightly, "If that's the case, then I will give it to you." Doran's expression was indifferent. Zhou Zishang did not mind. He cupped his hands and said, "Thank you, fellow cultivator." Daoren closed his eyes and did not speak. He only lightly tapped the jade bell in front of him. It emitted a pleasant sound. This was him sending the guest off. Zhou Zishang let out a loud laugh and walked out leisurely. Daoren stroked the white beard on his chin. Although his expression did not change, he was extremely surprised. This Zhou Zishang was so young, but he had already opened his meridians and condensed his qi. His body gave birth to a vision of rosy clouds. His cultivation was not below Doran's. He was indeed a disciple of a large sect. Moreover, his way of doing things was also very cunning. Although it seemed rude for him to come straight to the door, in reality, he was deeply aware that people in the sect often spoke in a vague manner. They would not be able to get to the point even after a long time. Therefore, he deliberately acted like a young man who was successful and arrogant, so that Daoren could not slowly answer him. If given time, this person's future would be limitless. Lowering his head to look at the book in his hand, this, Records of Internal Meditation of Xianyuan, was also an ancient book. It was said that it originally belonged to Taoist He of Nanhua sect. He did not know how it ended up in Zhou Zishang's hands, but it was indeed a high-grade method of opening immortal meridians. Once a cultivator's inner meridians were opened, the spiritual root would be planted and one's heart would be clear. Only then would one be able to practice superior immortal methods and bear fruit in the future. However, this method was not only complicated, but it also had a lot of hidden dangers. If one did not have the guidance of elders and masters from time to time, it was extremely easy for one's inner meridians to be broken and one's Tao foundation to be destroyed. As a result, one would have no hope of cultivating for the rest of their lives. Daoren could not help but sigh slightly. He did not know what happened between this Zhou Zishang and Zhang Yan that he actually wanted to destroy the latter's path of cultivation. Walking out of the temple, Zhou Zishang was very pleased with himself. He had thought of this plan very thoroughly. There must be something he did not know about Zhang Yan's visit to Azure Wu Mountain. It was always right to be cautious. He gave up on all the details and went straight to the point. Using the Good Abyss Temple to destroy Zhang Yan's Dao Foundation was the safest choice. Even if something happened, he could say that it was out of good intentions and Zhang Yan could only blame himself for not being lucky enough. If he failed to cultivate, Zhang Yan could only obediently return home to serve his wife's family. Chapter 10. For 10 consecutive days, Zhang Yan cultivated in seclusion in his cave residence in an attempt to break through. However, he didn't know if it was because he hadn't cultivated enough. Although he felt that his meridians were flowing smoothly and the primordial qi in his navel was getting thicker, he still hadn't taken the step he wanted. He was a little regretful that he couldn't break through like last time, but he knew it was reasonable. That time was 3 years of hard work, and it was impossible to have such a good thing every time. Since that was the case, there was no need to force it. On the path of cultivation, there were times when one had to persevere and advance courageously, and there were times when one had to be patient and impatient, and one had to advance slowly. How one chose was entirely up to one's heart. Presently, he didn't lack any Tao books or medicinal pills, and breaking through to the next realm was just around the corner, so there was naturally no need for him to fight for these 2 or 3 days. A few days ago, Ai Zhongwen came to invite him to the Dharma assembly, but he declined because he hadn't cultivated enough. Now, the Dharma assembly had been held for more than 3 days, but it would last for a month. Even if it was to make a name for himself, there was no need to rush. At the beginning of the next day, he took a bath and changed into a black Taoist robe with cloud patterns. After he was ready, he slowly walked to Misty Cloud Peak. Misty Cloud Peak was the 6th peak of Kangwu Mountain. There was a Taoist temple called Shangzhe Temple. It occupied a vast area with waterfalls and springs. The scenery was unique among the 18 peaks, so it was used as the venue for this Dharma assembly. He walked on the mountain path and looked around. He saw disciples from various sects coming and going, all wearing high hats and wide belts. About 2 hours later, he arrived at the gate of Shangzhe Temple. According to the tradition of the Dharma assembly, the gate was divided into 3 entrances, with the words heaven, earth, and human written on them. The heaven gate was always for the disciples of the host, the earth gate was for the disciples of various sects, and the human gate was for the nobles and officials. Zhang Yan was a disciple of Good Abyss Temple, so he had to enter through the heaven gate. He showed his token, so the boy didn't dare to stop him and let him enter the gate. However, just as he stepped into the mountain gate, someone stretched out a hand to stop him and said coldly, "Wait, which temple are you from?" Zhang Yan took a look and discovered that the person standing in front of him was a beautiful Taoist nun who looked to be in her 30s. She held a horsetail whisk in her hand and had fair skin. However, this Taoist nun's eyebrows were high and her gaze was sharp. The bridge of her nose was straight like a man's. At a glance, one could tell that she was a person with a strong personality. Zhang Yan performed a disciple's greeting to the Taoist nun and said, "This disciple is Zhang Yan of Good Abyss Monastery." "You are Zhang Yan?" The Taoist nun seemed to have heard of Zhang Yan's name before. She looked him up and down and said, "I heard that you are proficient in erosion runes. Let me ask you, where did you say Elephant River came from?" Without even thinking, Zhang Yan immediately said, "It's from the New Theory of Language and Painting, written by the unaffiliated Kong Lan 100 years ago." The New Theory of Language and Painting was a travel book, and Elephant River was one of the stories in it. It was about the ancient times when there was a group of villagers at the foot of Gao Mountain. Due to the scarcity of water, the villagers all relied on a spiritual stream to survive. However, this spiritual stream was intermittent every day, and the villagers suffered unspeakably. Because there were often 10 elephants playing in the stream, the villagers thought that it was the elephants' fault. After driving them away several times, they killed the 10 elephants, and the stream became clear. However, the villagers did not know that there was actually a giant snake cultivating upstream. Every time the giant snake came down to drink water, the elephants would chase it away. Once the elephants died, the giant snake could no longer be controlled. After cultivating to become a spirit, it descended the mountain and ate people every day. As a result, the villagers dispersed. The Taoist nun stared at Zhang Yan's eyes and said, "Since you know, let me ask you again. If you were that villager, what would you do?" The original intention of this story was to warn cultivators not to be confused by the appearance in front of them on the path of cultivation. Instead, they should investigate the cause and find the appropriate way to deal with it. Therefore, there were teachers who used it to test the temperament of the younger disciples. Some disciples believed that with the elephants around, the villagers could survive even though the water flow was intermittent. Therefore, they should maintain the status quo and endure it. Some disciples believed that since the villagers could kill the elephants, they should be able to kill the giant snake too. They should go upstream to kill the giant snake. There were even disciples who believed that the villagers did not know the cause and could only remedy the situation afterwards. Therefore, they should push one person out to feed the snake every day. In short, the answers were all kinds of strange and varied. Zhang Yan thought for a while and answered without hesitation, "Killing one elephant is enough." The Taoist nun's eyes flashed and she asked, "Why?" Zhang Yan said in a deep voice, "Even though there are 10 elephants today, if they are allowed to multiply, who knows what will happen tomorrow? Once there are more elephants, there will be a day when the spiritual stream will be cut off, so the elephants must be killed. The 10 elephants can chase the giant snake, which shows that the tribe is strong. One more or one less doesn't affect the overall situation. The water flow is intermittent, so one less elephant will make it smoother. The villagers can live, and the giant snake won't come out to eat people." There was no standard answer to this story. The Taoist nun was expressionless. She stepped aside and said, "You can go in." Zhang Yan cupped his hands and lifted the hem of his Taoist robe. He crossed the threshold and strode inside. Not long after he left, a young girl flashed out from the side door beside the Taoist nun. It was Zhao Yuan's sister, Zhao Ying. She grabbed the Taoist nun's arm and shook it. She complained, "Uncle Master, why did you let that thief pass so easily? Last time, he made my big brother vomit blood. I still haven't settled the score with him." The Taoist nun touched Zhao Ying's head and said dotingly, "Do you know how your master answered when Grandmaster asked this question?" Zhao Ying's curiosity was aroused. She asked, "What did master say?" "Killing one elephant." Zhao Ying was surprised. She said, "My master also answered like that. At that time, your grandmaster was also very satisfied. Later, I asked your master the reason. Your master said that the answer was because 9 is the limit of numbers. 10 is too much. Too much is overflowing, and too little is perfect. This is the heavenly Tao. That's why I have to kill one elephant." The Taoist nun sighed and said, "Zhang Yan's thoughts coincide with the heavenly Tao. Such a person's future is immeasurable. If we don't get rid of him now, we can't afford to offend him. Do you understand?" Zhao Ying nodded as if she understood. The Taoist nun stared into the distance. She seemed to be thinking about something. Actually, what Zhao Ying's Shifu said that day was not, "Kill one elephant," but "Leave 9 elephants." Although there was no essential difference between "kill one elephant" and "leave one elephant," the temperament and bearing revealed were completely different. From his reply, it could be seen that Zhang Yan's temperament was decisive, but he did not lose caution. But when he said these words, his chest was filled with murderous intent, his eyes were like lightning. This kind of imposing manner made her feel frightened. Although she was not as proficient in Yi Li as her senior, she could still see that Zhang Yan had great karma. She could not help but sigh. She did not know if it was a blessing or a curse for such a person to stay on Mount Kanggu. After Zhang Yan stepped into the mountain gate, he walked all the way to the second mountain gate. However, he did not know that for the past 3 days, the new disciples of Qinsang school were blocked on the heavenly gate by a young man from Guangyuan sect. No one was able to reach the top of the third mountain gate. However, they knew that they were in the wrong and did not dare to use force. 3 years ago, Nanhua sect's lower house was the host of the Dharma assembly. At that time, there was a new disciple of Qinsang school named Qin Feng. His younger sister had become a disciple of a Nanhua sect's master 10 years ago. Later on, she died a violent death for some unknown reason. The inside story was no longer known. In short, the two sects had enmity with each other since then. Chen Feng took advantage of the Dharma assembly to block the heavenly gate. He kept saying that he wanted to compete with the disciples of Nanhua sect. After passing the mountain gate, there was a saying that one could pass the test. As long as one felt that one's ability was above others, they could stop anyone on the way to the mountain gate and compete with each other. Using this to make a name for themselves, it would be a good story whether they won or lost. Therefore, the disciples of Nanhua sect did not care. After that, no matter if it was deciphering the eroded runes or fighting techniques, the disciples of Nanhua sect were all defeated by Chen Feng. Originally, no one would blame him if he stopped while he was ahead. However, who would have thought that he would still insist on not letting the disciples of Nanhua sect pass? He said that he wanted to block the disciples of Nanhua sect on the mountain until the end of the Dharma assembly. Because of this, some people could not stand it anymore. Guangyuan sect had always been on good terms with Nanhua sect. More than 10 disciples came up to reason with Chen Feng, but in the end, they could not help but attack. Although Chen Feng was alone, he was able to fight against so many people. Not only did he not fall into a disadvantageous position, he even beat them up badly. In the end, he even said that the disciples of Guangyuan sect were not allowed to pass. After a month, none of the disciples of Nanhua sect and Guangyuan sect could reach the top of the 3 mountain gates. This caused the lower houses of the two sects to lose a lot of face. Therefore, they had been holding a grudge. This time, it was Qinsang school's turn to be the host. This was the disciples of the two sects coming here to regain their face. As for those sects who knew about the conflict, they pretended to be deaf and dumb. 3 years ago, after Chen Feng returned to the mountain, he opened his immortal meridians and went to the upper house to cultivate. With his current status, he naturally could not come here again. However, he left the consequences to the lower house. In the side hall of the mountain gate, more than 20 disciples of Qinsang school's lower house were gathered. These people were all from Xianmen families and usually had their own circles. Therefore, in the eyes of the disciples of Azure Parasol Mountain, they had only heard of their names. The person sitting at the head of the table was called Jingsun. He was the eldest disciple of Virtue Cultivation Temple's lower house. He was the oldest and had the highest cultivation level. However, he had a gentle personality and was not good at fighting. 2 days ago, when Mo Yuan blocked his way and said that he wanted to compete with the erosive runes, he did not take this matter to heart. However, until today, when no disciple could reach the top of the 3 mountain gates, he realized that something was wrong. He knew that this was Guangyuan sect's revenge. If he waited any longer, Qinsang school, as the host, would lose a lot of face if no one reached the top. Therefore, he gathered all the disciples together to discuss a strategy. Zheng Sun sighed and said, Guangyuan sect's junior brother Mo Yuan is still young, but I heard that he can decipher the erosive runes with just a finger. I have already sent junior brother Ma and junior brother Zhen to fight him. Whether they can win or not depends on the result. Not long after, a young man walked in from the back of the side hall and bowed to the disciples around him. With a sad expression, he said, I am not as skilled as him. I can only place my hopes on senior brother Zhen. I am ashamed. Everyone was silent. After a while, a boy came in and reported, Senior brother Zhen has fainted. The disciples looked at each other. One of them stood up and said coldly, could it be that Mo Yuan knows that he can't win, so he resorted to force? The boy quickly said, "Senior brother Mo fainted because his mind is exhausted." The man snorted and sat back down. They were eager to fight, but Guangyuan's sect had sent a 13-year-old boy. If they used force, it would be bad for their reputation. Zheng Sun's eyes fell on a young man in white. "Junior brother Chen, you." Junior brother Chen waved his hand and said, "Senior brother Zheng, there is no need to say anything. I am also a disciple of the Chen clan. It is not convenient for me to show up." Chen Feng was from the Dengyang Chen clan, and junior brother Chen was from the Luochuan Chen clan. Although they were from the same branch, they had separated 100 years ago. Although he said this because he didn't want to show up, it was not an excuse. Zheng Sun didn't want to push it too far, so he turned his eyes to another man with a cold face. "Junior brother Lin Yuan." Lin Yuan shook his head and said, "Mo Yuan is only 13 years old. It is not a fair fight. Senior brother, you know that I care about my reputation, so please don't force me." A bitter smile appeared on Zheng Sun's face as he asked a few more disciples in succession. Some said that Mo Yuan was just an in-name disciple, and if he went, he wouldn't be able to lower his status. Even if he won, he would be ridiculed by others. Some said that they were worried about their reputation and didn't want to bully the weak. Some said that they had been cultivating too hard recently, which had caused them to be mentally exhausted and couldn't handle the fight. All in all, no one was willing to go. In fact, they all knew that Mo Yuan was a prodigy. They had seen how the two disciples were defeated. Not only would they not be able to win, but if they lost, they would also bring shame to their clan. As for the glory of the sect, it naturally couldn't compare to the reputation of their clan. Thus, they would rather waste their time here than show up. Ai Zhongwen was sitting at the end of the table. When he heard these words, he couldn't help but shake his head. When would this stalemate end? Could it be that the Qinsang school really didn't care about its reputation? He thought for a moment, then stood up and said loudly, "Senior brother Zheng, I know of someone in the Good Abyss Monastery who is skilled in erosion symbols. He can definitely beat Mo Yuan." You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.